Can't relate to that yet.
Yeah, well, enjoy not relating to that while you can, is what I would say.
I will. I'm not in a hurry yet. But listen, we got a lot to talk about. You have been busy working away on your latest book that is coming out on November 15th. So we're recording right before then. This will have come out when the episode's on. So link is in the description. Check it out. It's called Tracers in the Dark. Fantastic book.
Thank you.
But we had gotten to touch on it last time, just like mentioned you were working on it, but you wanted to save some of the conversation for when it was coming out. And I got to tell you, I think that was a really good idea because I was under the impression a lot of it was going to come back to just the Silk Road, but you went so far beyond that.
Definitely. I mean, the Silk Road was the beginning of the story, but truly it is a decade-long story that starts with the Silk Road and ends, in a place that is, with about dark web sites that are 10 times the size of the Silk Road, among other things. Yeah. Yeah.
And for people out there who just aren't familiar, can you briefly just explain what the Silk Road was? And then we'll get into it for sure. But
yeah, for sure. I mean, the Silk Road, and tell me if we should break this down even further. The Silk Road was a dark web drug website, where a dark web drug market where you could essentially log on with this anonymity software called Tor, the Tor browser. Silk Road itself ran as a website that used Tor to make it impossible for anybody to figure out where it was hosted and who ran it. And it was essentially like this dark web eBay for all sorts of contraband, but mainly drugs. It was essentially like an online bazaar, like a market for every drug imaginable that grew into, by 2013, a massive operation where like hundreds of millions of dollars in drugs were being transacted all the time.
Yeah, and when you think about it, it was a huge part of the story was the fact that you had to use Bitcoin to do the actual transactions, and this was the earliest days of cryptocurrency period, but Bitcoin as well, because 2011 Bitcoin came out in 2009, so it was much cheaper and far less known, and this website in a lot of ways people say legitimized it.
Totally. I mean, should I talk about like how I started
Absolutely.
getting into...
Let's get to the start of it. Yep.
I first, I guess around this time you're referencing, like 2010, 2011, I was working on a book that we talked about last time that was really, like, partially at least about the cypherpunk movement, this social movement, very interesting group of mostly dudes, I should say, who I was going to say guys, but it is mostly men who believed that they could use encryption. And this started, I'm really talking about like a group that began in the 1990s. They believed that they could use encryption technologies like secrecy tools, like the ability to encrypt information so that even the government couldn't crack it, to take power away from like federal governments and corporations and give it to individuals.
So mostly like radical libertarian types.
Exactly, yeah. And definitely this group like gave rise to what we now use as like VPNs and Tor, which I just talked about, and also WikiLeaks is like and the whole idea of granting anonymity, but actually guaranteeing it for journalistic sources and leakers using these tools that Julian Assange came up with. He was a cypherpunk too. That came out of the cypherpunk movement. And so as I was like kind of getting like really obsessed with this group for a different book that I was writing, I came upon what seemed to be this new cypherpunk invention. It was described to me that way. Bitcoin. This guy, Gavin Andreessen, who was one of the first Bitcoin developers, programmers, gave this kind of TED-style talk that I watched on YouTube at the time, where he described Bitcoin as basically like cypherpunk money, like a kind of digital cash for the internet that, among other things, like could be sent anonymously to anyone in the world. That it's appeared to be this kind of cypherpunk holy grail thing that this movement I've been trying to achieve for a long time without success, which is like essentially anonymous crypto money. I mean, the word cryptocurrency was like not in common use then. So when I wrote the first piece, I actually interviewed Gavin Andreessen. I tracked him down. I wrote this piece for Forbes magazine about Bitcoin, which I think was like the first print magazine piece about Bitcoin.
Like 2011-ish?
In April of 2011.
Okay.
And I actually headlined that piece "cryptocurrency," like thinking I'd come up with this clever pun, but like nobody was using that phrase back then. And Gavin had described Bitcoin to me as untraceable, and I believed it was. And even Satoshi Nakamoto, this mysterious creator of Bitcoin, nobody, of course, still knows who he or she or they are.
Yeah. Could be multiple people.
Had themselves or himself or whatever described Bitcoin in this email, introducing it to a cryptography mailing list and saying, like, among its features that participants can be anonymous. So it really did seem like even the creator of Bitcoin thought this was going to be like a kind of anonymous cash. Like you could, for the digital world, like you could put, unmarked bills in a briefcase and like send it across the world to anybody without revealing your identity at all, without any identifying information associated with it whatsoever. And that seemed to me to be like, I mean, I unfortunately was not interested in investing in Bitcoin at the time. In April of 2011, a Bitcoin was worth $1. And I thought like, as I write this magazine piece, maybe I should just buy like $40 worth of Bitcoins, like 40 Bitcoins. And unfortunately, like I tried this on the only existing cryptocurrency exchange at the time, Mt. Gox, which was very buggy.
We'll talk about that for sure.
and it didn't work. I couldn't get the transaction to go through, and I gave up, which was like I don't like to think too much about how much that mistake cost me. But
Yikes!
What I'm trying to, it was a multi-million dollar little.
I got
snafu.
sick reading that for you.
Yeah,
I was like,
yeah, but then I wasn't interested in like this notion of Bitcoin as a lot of people see it today as like kind of digital gold, like a way to store your money as an investment. I was interested in, I think a lot of people were back then, in the notion that Bitcoin was kind of like this almost subversive sort of digital cash that like could be spent without a trace, just like cash can be in a drug deal or whatever. And sure enough, like as you were saying, I mean, just months later, the Silk Road kind of appeared online. I think it actually may have launched in 2010, but nobody really was aware of it until 2011. And I like came upon this like dark web market that seemed to be offering like all sorts of illegal drugs for sale in Bitcoin. And it kind of confirmed this idea to me that like, yeah, Bitcoin truly is a crypto cash for the internet, and it evades any attempt at regulation or tracing or law enforcement. And that's certainly like how the creator of this Silk Road saw it. This another mysterious at the time figure who called himself the Dread Pirate Roberts. To be fair, like I should say that when I first saw the Silk Road online, I was like, this can't be real. This must be a scam. Like this like there's heroin listed for sale here. Like this is either like I don't know, like just some sort of pipe dream. Like this is not going to really work, or it's truly a scam. Like somebody's trying to steal people's bitcoins, of which there have been a million scams that.
Still are, yeah.
Yeah. And it was only like a few months later after that Adrian Chen at Gawker wrote the real like first real piece about the Silk Road. And he had found people who had bought like acid off the Silk Road, and it worked perfectly well. And kind of I couldn't believe that I'd missed, like, being so obsessed with the cypherpunks, I'd like missed an even bigger story than Bitcoin, it seemed at the time. Like an actual black market on the dark web, transacting in cryptocurrency and selling every drug imaginable, and it was real. I mean, that was another regret. But
you tested it out though.
Well, sure. I mean, certainly, like at that
stuff.
point, I was like fully like, I was in fact trying to figure out like how can I get the next big story about the Silk Road. As it grew into like a massive phenomenon, and as that when the Gawker piece came out that Adrian wrote, Chuck Schumer and I forget Joe Manchin, I think, like held a press conference even to say like, this is we condemn this horrible website that is represents like a new chapter in the war on drugs and is powered by untraceable cryptocurrency. It was a massive controversy immediately, and they called on the DEA to shut this site down.
Yeah, and that was towards the beginning. But obviously Bitcoin was worth a lot less. But in the first year there, they were already doing tens of millions of dollars of revenue on that. No.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing about the exchange rate of Bitcoin goes up, goes down, but the actual sort of economy of buying and selling things in Bitcoins, like the drugs didn't change in value. So anybody who was buying heroin on the Silk Road or acid or whatever in 2011, that turned out to be very expensive acid for them because if you spent like whatever. When Bitcoin was worth $1 and you were buying whatever $50 worth of weed or something, that turned out to be like millions of dollars worth in future money. But nobody could have known that at the time, and it really was working. And absolutely, not immediately, but very soon, like the Silk Road was doing hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of transactions a day.
Now, how would it work? Because you have a dark web market, so it's not like you have a government backstop regulator here. This is all obviously completely under the table. They have to access it on Tor, as you said, and use Bitcoin to transact. But if I went on there, as you did, and it might be helpful to talk about like your experience when you did buy some stuff on behalf of Forbes and everything. But
certainly, only on behalf of Forbes.
Only on behalf of Forbes.
Just as an experiment.
Did not use any of the drugs. Let's be clear about that. But still, when you would make the purchase, my understanding is that the money wouldn't go straight away to the seller. They'd put it in like an escrow thing so that the transaction would have to be confirmed on your end. Like you had to receive it and then tell the site like, ooh, I got it. Now they can give the money over.
Yeah. I mean, the Silk Road was really a brilliant invention. I mean, people look back on it and see flaws in it, but the Dread Pirate Roberts who ran this thing really did come up with some serious innovations.
Yeah.
Just they were almost like financial innovation, even more than like technological. So, there was an escrow where when you buy drugs, your money is put into escrow and then it's only released once you receive the drugs in the mail. Something that nobody really would have. I would have never thought that was possible to ship drugs in the mail in these quantities, and that it would not all be caught. But it worked, and it was.
Yeah.
And the dealers, like the vendors, who were third parties, like the Dread Pirate Roberts is sitting in the middle as this administrator of the market. He's the market maker, but then like the buyers and sellers are acting independently, and these dealers started to like really come up with clever ways to hide the drugs in shipping it. And there was an entire user forum where people discussed like the best ways to like obfuscate the drugs that you were sending in the mail.
Yeah, there were a lot of good ways to do that. I remember college. That was some wild shit people would do.
Yeah, and like the clever things like you're sending like psychedelic mushrooms in the mail, and you put it inside of a fake beef stroganoff package that looks like the dried mushrooms on the side of that whatever. I mean, there were just an endless number of these things, but then also just like triple sealing and Mylar and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that all worked incredibly well. But then once you receive the drugs in the mail, you confirm that you got it. That only then is the money in the escrow released to the seller, so they can't scam you. Then there's like ratings and reviews, which in the drug world is actually like really important. You can, the quality of these drugs can be assessed in a way that was never possible with, just like buying random drugs from some dude in the bathroom of a club or something. It was a real innovation. And not like, I would never claim that it was absolutely a criminal operation, but it was also, it's really important to get this across that like the Dread Pirate Roberts was a political figure.
Yes.
He saw the Silk Road as a political experiment first, at least. Like that was his first conception of it. I do believe that. Like he was this radical libertarian. He wanted with the Silk Road to just show that it was going to be possible in this new era of this kind of cypherpunk utopia that he foresaw, to just like buy and sell things without any participation from the government, no taxation, no restrictions. Anybody can buy and sell anything. and put into their bodies whatever they choose to. So he really, I think, wanted to take the violence out of the drug trade, among other things.
Yeah, he was he thought the war on drugs was a total disaster and that this was the one-stop shop to fix it. And I think when you look through the catalogs now of all his online correspondence behind the names, it's pretty clear that, to me, and we're talking about DPR, who ended up being Ross Ulbricht. We'll talk about how that went down and everything. But Ross was a guy who, I think, from behind the keyboard, started to feel the power of the movement itself and let that affect his actions, because he wasn't a guy. This was not a guy out there buying Lamborghinis or anything like that. He lived a very simple life. He wasn't this like just doing it for his own fame type guy, but the movement, the political ideology of radical libertarianism in this case, really overtook him and drove an incredible innovation, but also led him to slip up and get caught.
I would say, I mean, I feel bad saying this because just to set the context here, Ross Ulbricht is like serving life in prison now, and
no parole.
Without parole, 2 life sentences, I think, and he is in a vulnerable position. He can't truly like speak for himself, but I do think so I feel bad like saying critical things about him, but just you have to tell this story properly. I think that he was eventually, we'll get to this, I guess, kind of corrupted in his ideals. And I think eventually he was not just doing stuff out of libertarian and idealistic motivation. He had become sort of enamored of the power and the millions of dollars flowing like through, around his invention, and did some, nasty things to try to protect that. But it definitely, there's no question that it started from a place of idealism, and he had rules for the Silk Road that you could only buy and sell things that he considered to be victimless crimes. There was no child pornography, what we now call like child sexual abuse materials. There was no murder for hire, although that's a story that the media has told endlessly. The Silk Road did not have like assassination services for sale. There were at some points weapons for sale. I mean, the Dread Pirate Roberts believed, I think, that like, guns can be used for self-defense, but there were limits in that he like disallowed any weapon that could be used on like large groups of people, for instance. Like he didn't, I think, want obviously to become like a hub for terrorism. And eventually he shut down even the gun sales because it wasn't really working very well. I think it's a lot harder to send a gun through the mail. Yeah,
I could imagine. I feel like that one they can find through metal detectors pretty easy.
Right. But there were, this notion of like victimless crime was real on the Silk Road. There were hacking tools that were sold eventually, but the rules were that those are not supposed to be sold. And eventually the government pointed to those as examples of like, exceptions to this victimless crime rule. And I don't really know how that happened. I think that in part the site just grew so big that, or I don't know. I mean, even that is like selling hacking tools was a very small part of the Silk Road's business. And for a very long time, like even the drug sales, it's important to point out, most of it was not like heroin,
right?
Was not cocaine even. It was like
mushrooms, acid.
A lot of ecstasy.
Yeah,
ecstasy was like a major product on there, in part because the quality of it could be guaranteed, which is always like, I think been a challenge with MDMA. So there was like when you looked at the Silk Road in 2011, 2012, it really did seem like a super interesting and ethically complicated place, not just not a drug cartel or a criminal operation, in a simple way like that.
Definitely violating all international law for sure,
and people bought heroin and died from the Silk Road. There's no doubt that it expanded the drug trade probably in ways that there were stories of people who had gone clean, but then moved someplace where like drugs were not very accessible. But then when they saw the Silk Road, they couldn't resist the temptation.
Yeah,
and drugs are morally complicated.
Yes, they are.
But I just always want to like tell the story of the Silk Road in this way that doesn't just make it sound like Ross Ulbricht, like the Dread Pirate Roberts, was Scarface or something.
Yeah, so my stance on this, and you and I have talked about this before a little bit off air, and I've talked about it on some other podcasts back in the day, earlier on when we were doing these. I think there were 2 podcasts in particular where it got covered a bunch. But, when people were talking about like the pardon with Ross, because his sentence was insane, what he was given. His crime did not fit the sentence at all. But when people are talking about pardon, I've always backed off that and said, listen, I don't think the guy's necessarily a bad guy. And I think there's a lot of amazing innovation he had. But you can't violate every international law on drugs and some other things and not be punished for that. But I've always therefore looked at like commutation as a route with his sentence, which we'll see what happens there. But, I don't think that – I think the world can get really complicated and you can see people innovate ahead of where governments are and perhaps then – not perhaps, in this case, 100% inject their political ideology into it in a way that's radical. Let's call it what it is. But I also think that the way that they painted him out to be was far beyond the scope of what he was. For one thing – I feel pretty confident based on the evidence that he was in over his head pretty quickly and that it's very, very, to me, I fully believe, but I think from an evidence perspective, it is very easy to make the case, at least I'll say, that there were multiple Dread Pirate Roberts, multiple people using that account. And so there's no doubt that some of the correspondence that happened on that account from behind the keyboard online was questionable, to say the least, and morally awful in some cases as it got to with calling hits on people and things like that. But I think things do change when you're doing things online. It doesn't make anything right, but to me, just looking at it from a humanity perspective, I mean, we see people on Twitter, right? People on Twitter will say things that you can meet these people in person and then they're like kind of nice, or like they're not like that, or they'd never say it like that. And it's just this thing where you feel real confident behind a keyboard being able to say, do this, or I think this, or I think that. And there's definitely a part of me that thinks a lot of that happened with Ross and even some of the other guys who were operating behind that keyboard there, to where if some of the other guys were putting hits on people or whatever, and some people have accused Ross of that, he's denied that a lot, and the government did not bring those charges at trial. But, if that were the case, I don't view it as the same capabilities of someone who's sitting here in a room and says, go hit that guy. You know what I mean? There's more of an emotional disconnection, and that's also their fault for setting up a system to where that is possible to happen.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Like I don't know where to begin with this. Like like I said, I think Ross was very idealistic. But he was, it's like, and to your point that he was ahead of his time, I think so many kinds of drugs have been legalized or are about to be legalized that were for sale on the Silk Road. But it's also worth pointing out that Ross wasn't for drug legalization. He didn't want he didn't want drugs to be legalized and taxed, or the Dread Pirate Roberts didn't anyway. I should say, if I could just tell the story a little bit. Yeah, please. I got really,
you found yourself into the middle of it.
Right. I mean, I got really obsessed with the Dread Pirate Roberts. Even beyond the Silk Road, his creation, I wanted to do a piece on this person, the Dread Pirate Roberts, who was this political figure, saw himself as like leading a revolution in the way he was talking to his community on the Silk Road, which had its own user forums. He had a Dread Pirate Roberts book club where he was like, recommending like anarcho-capitalist philosophy stuff. I mean, so I did like bug him for about 8 months until he agreed to an interview, and that's where he laid out a lot of this political ideology. When
was this?
That was in. I talked to him on July 4th of 2013. For like, I don't know, a long time. It was all like done over the Silk Road's Tor protected messaging system. He like
all text.
He made me like a temporary drug dealer on the site, essentially, just to be able to have an account to like message with him. directly.
How long did it take you to convince him to do that? Because you're doing it all via text, obviously.
Yeah.
It's not like you're seeing who he is, but how long did that take?
It took 8 months. Like I started asking in 2012, I think, and then he didn't, I think, want that kind of visibility or heat. And then I think
What was your pitch to him? I'm curious because you find your way to get you can see it in your books too with some of the people you get access to, but then look at your career of some of the publicity between Ross and before that Julian Assange, before anyone who knew who Julian Assange was. Like you find your way into these situations and people give you the trust to be like, yeah, fuck yeah, come in, Andy.
Well, I do think that part of it is that Ross's ego was, or the Dread Pirate Roberts, whatever, his ego was growing over time as the Silk Road became bigger and bigger. And as law enforcement continued to chase them totally in vain. Like, I think that Ross's hubris as it, became like, 1 and 2 and then 2.5 years ultimately, that he was evading law enforcement successfully. He thought that he was untouchable. And what he was doing was so remarkable that I think he started to want attention. But this is not actually even in the book, but I did do a thing with him eventually where I was like, okay, my editors say now that we're going to do this piece one way or another. If it's not going to be about you, I'm going to do it about your competitor site. Because at that point, there were these sort of copycat dark web markets, and they were part of the story too. I wasn't like lying to him. But I think at that point he was like, well, I can't abide by one of these other dark web administrators getting the credit instead of me. So that's when he actually agreed to do it. And I don't know, that feels a little, maybe that's manipulative, but it was true also that like at some point this other site, Atlantis, was had popped up, was like gaining some of his market share, a little bit at least, and the administrators of that site had like their own chief marketing officer and stuff. So they were like ready to talk anytime. And if he didn't, if he wasn't going to talk, somebody else was going to. So
and how long did you talk with him on there?
Well, I talked with him, like I said, for months off the record. And then, then
on the
we
record,
spent
though.
like, 5 hours
Wow.
going back and forth. But that's like in part because Tor is really slow. And also because I think in retrospect that he probably was talking to me while conferring with other people who helped him run the site, and including possibly, I think we differ in our opinions of like to what degree there were multiple Dread Pirate Roberts, but there was definitely this kind of second in command guy.
Yeah, what was his name again?
He goes by Variety Jones.
Yes, that's it. Variety Jones.
I think his real name turned out to be Roger Clark, I believe. I haven't covered his case so closely, but he was
in Thailand or something. Was that it?
Yeah. Thailand comes up again later, but he I think was not only kind of advising Ross, but also like pushing him to become more of like a hardcore criminal. I've seen ultimately the chats between them, the IMs. I don't think that they knew each other's real identities, by the way. Like so many people on the dark web, they work together only through text, through Tor, never actually met in person.
Didn't Ross know the identity? I could be remembering this wrong from Nick Bilton's book, but I feel like Ross, there was a thing where he made anyone who was going to join on send them a copy of their driver's license or something.
It's a really interesting question. Like, he definitely did that for most of the people who worked for him. But now that I think about it, I don't think he did that for Roger Clark.
Might be true.
For Variety Jones.
I can't remember.
It was this incredible thing that like he made the people who worked for him send them their identifying information, and he kept it on his encrypted laptop. Thinking this was like he had full disk encryption on his laptop, so he thought if I just close the lid, law enforcement will never be able to access this.
That's the problem.
And like that, but just the fact that it took so long to catch Variety Jones, the second in command guy, whereas the other people on the site were quite easily identified because their IDs were on his laptop. But we'll get to like how that laptop was accessed. Yeah. But like, I think that probably Variety Jones was just more careful. And he also had like a sort of power over Ross. I mean, you could see in their conversations when they eventually came out in legal documents, that like he was really influencing Ross in a kind of insidious way. And I've read the conversation where Ross thinks that he's got an employee who has stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Bitcoins from him, and he doesn't know what to do. And Variety Jones, his second in command guy, Lothario kind of figure, is like, I think this guy needs to get killed.
That was Curtis Green, right?
That's right. And
the employee.
And Ross, you can see him like hesitating, not wanting to do this. I mean, the whole notion of the Silk Road is that it's going to be a non-violent, that it actually reduces violence in the drug trade. But he like, you can see him be talked into it by Variety Jones. And I think you and I like maybe disagree about this. I do believe that Ross himself, who I believe was at the very least, most of the time, he was the Dread Pirate Roberts, that he was persuaded to try to have people killed.
Now, I'm not going to put the picture of Curtis Green in the corner because I don't want to get the video demonetized, but people can Google that. Silk Road, Curtis Green, fake murder. There's a picture that it will look like a dead body, but he was very much alive. There were federal agents who staged the image itself. I forget what they use, like soup packets or some shit.
Exactly. They use like Campbell's soup, like to make it look like he had sort of vomited like during this torture session.
Exactly.
I mean, it's all really grisly stuff, but all fake. Like
all fake.
The DEA. This is like a bizarre story that I don't tell this story in like incredible detail in the book. This book is just tells the Silk Road story as a preamble to what was to come.
Yes.
But like it is an amazing story of like they essentially identified Curtis Green, set him up to be this victim of a fake murder.
The task force did.
And this is, by the way, like one task force in Baltimore that was going after the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Are you talking about, just to be clear, are you talking about just the DEA part of it right now with Baltimore?
It was just Baltimore. It was actually like multiple agencies.
Because I was going to say, it was
Homeland Security,
yeah.
DEA, Secret Service.
FBI,
they were all involved.
IRS.
I'm not sure about FBI or IRS in Baltimore.
Right. And okay, that's what I'm asking.
There was another team simultaneously tracking DPR, chasing Ulbricht, eventually identifying him, based out of New York.
That was Chris Tarbell and
that's
the FBI.
That's the FBI, IRS, IRS criminal investigations. And they had their own Homeland Security guy. So it's a very complicated, but there were actually two competing teams going after him.
Was that I'm going to fuck up his name, but Van Dergeman or something? Was he the New York one? And then there was other Homeland Security people working with Baltimore?
Well, that's true. Yeah. I mean, Jared Duryagian is the guy's name. And he was based out of Chicago, just to complicate things further, but he was working with the New York team.
Right. Okay.
And they were, just to simplify it, like they were the more by the book, successful, and I would say like kind of like, not to be too insulting to like all the people involved in Baltimore, but the more top tier, like Southern District of New York, where that case was prosecuted out of, where it was led, is always like the one that's doing the big internet cases.
I want to bookmark that though, because I do want to come back to how they access Frosty. That's interesting. But the server.
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to get you off Curtis Green though. There's so much here. We'll
there's this Baltimore team that was doing much, I don't know, weirder stuff, including faking this murder. But I don't think so. There was never a real murder that Ross actually paid for, or. But I do actually believe that he thought that he had someone murdered.
It's a perfectly reasonable opinion to have, and you and I have talked about this before, like I said off air, and so I respect that, because also, as people have already heard, you were at the middle of this thing while it was going down. You were then a main feature in the documentary Deep Web in 2015, which discussed a lot of this case right when it was finishing up trial. But with Curtis Green, couple things that I would throw out there just as like maybe, but I don't know. First of all, I have always wondered, and I don't even know how technologically possible this is, but you never know with government organizations and what they have access to. I have always wondered if there was any correspondence or data edited after the fact. That has been a curious thing to me. And secondly, I find it very suspect that Curtis Green himself, the actual guy, Curtis Green, who today is, he made a deal to do that whole thing, and I don't even think did time, or if he did, very short time, but he's regular citizen doing his thing now. He goes around with Ross Ulbricht's mother, Lynn, and does podcasts and openly discusses how
he fully agrees rather with you. He
Yes.
says there were multiple dread pirates. I don't know what to make of that. I can say, yeah, maybe, we have to like the chat logs, like some of them were from the Silk Road server. Some of them were for Ross Ulbricht's laptop. Could those have been altered?
I don't know. I say that totally.
And it seems unlikely, but possible, I guess. But the thing is, and this is like what my book is about, is that at Ross Ulbricht's trial, they not only showed that they could trace the Bitcoins from the Silk Road server to Ross Ulbricht's laptop, but they showed money coming out of Ross Ulbricht's laptop that was exactly the amounts and the timing for the hits that he was commissioning. And this is not the Curtis Green murder for hire.
Yeah, there were like 5 or something under
another
question.
Collection of them that followed, sort of like going after a scammer who had scammed money from the Silk Road and his associates. And in that case, you can see it on the blockchain. And this is what my book is about.
Yes.
This is not like this is an interesting case because it's almost like I after Ross Ulbricht was busted, and we haven't even talked about how that happened.
Yeah,
but,
we'll get to that in a minute.
I attended every minute of his trial in New York, and I was as shocked as anybody when one day of this trial they used Bitcoin tracing as part of the evidence against him. I mean, it had started to become clear at that point that Bitcoin was not the untraceable digital cash, anonymous, untraceable money that I had thought it was, that perhaps even people like the Cypherpunks and even Satoshi Nakamoto thought it was. But this was the first time it ever was used in a courtroom, and they could show on the blockchain. And I've looked at this myself. I mean, the blockchain. The amazing thing about it is that it's a public record of every Bitcoin transaction. If you know whose addresses are whose, you can look that up yourself. And I did this, and matching it with the what the prosecution has listed as Ross Ulbricht's Bitcoin addresses taken from his laptop, you can see yourself the transactions where he was paying what he thought was a hitman. So he actually thought it was like a Hell's Angels gang member who was going to do these murders for him.
How long was his trial, approximately?
It was very short. I mean, I don't know. I haven't covered that many trials, like gavel to gavel, as they say, but it was, I think, 3 weeks maybe.
Okay, so it wasn't like crazy long. But
no.
One thing that has always sat wrong with me, because again, you would think too, the basis of your book right here, which is that they can trace Bitcoin. We're going to talk a lot about that with these other cases as well today, because it's pretty nuts and people need to hear about this. But you would think that in the trial, when they're even presenting that as evidence, which I wasn't even, maybe I was aware at one point, but I didn't even remember that they did that, because when they announced the charges against Ross and catching him, and maybe we should talk about finally how that happened in a second, but in the media, they tried him by media. It was going to be a federal courtroom, so no cameras in there. They knew that. They said, oh, we're going to charge him with 6 hits and all this stuff and running this whole site and whatever. And then they get to the trial, and before the trial, they drop all the hits charges. They did not charge him with that, yet they still discussed it in the courtroom, and they quote-unquote provided the smoking gun evidence that he exchanged the proper Bitcoin to have ordered these hits. So why did they not charge him with the hits? That's what makes me go, there's a rat there.
Well, I don't know why they didn't charge him. I can say that they did charge him with murder for hire in another case in Maryland because of that Baltimore group that was doing that separately. They actually had a murder charge against him, which that case was then dropped once he was given a life sentence. So the question is, like, why did the Southern District of New York, in the case that actually went to trial, not include murder for hire? And what I've actually been told years later is that it was like a jurisdictional issue. But, I don't know why.
Never heard of that for Southern District in New York.
They could have, I'm sure, made a case somehow to include the
Yeah, it's
murders.
crazy.
I think that they
That's
would
not a
have
good
to have
argument.
shown that like the purported victims or the purported perpetrator was in the Southern District of New York, and they did have to do stuff like buy drugs undercover in the Southern District of New York to make that a New York case. That there are like always these jurisdictional things that are like kind of legal sausage making for prosecutors.
Yes.
But is that why? I don't know. It's strange, and I think truly a problem that the jury in that room and I and everybody else, hears the whole story of Ross's attempted murders for hire, and that's not actually those are not the charges against
Right.
him, and then he is sentenced in part based on that.
Are you even? But this is where I'm really
but
not a
the-
lawyer. Are you allowed to do that if you don't charge someone with something? Are you allowed to present evidence? That might be a really dumb question, but
I would say the other thing, I'm sorry to get like really legalistic. The other thing is that there was a charge against Ross called continuing criminal enterprise. And people call that the Kingpin statute. And what that like technically means is like that you have like at least 5 people working for you
Right.
in your criminal enterprise. And he certainly did, I think.
yes, absolutely.
I think his defense probably could have gone after that and said, like, prove that, like prove that there were 5 people working for him, because I'm not sure that they could have proved that. But who knows?
Yeah, by the way, I always thought this was, he needed to get 8-10 years in prison. And the
Yeah.
other guys in the case all got like 3 to 6. I mean, I always thought, to be clear, that like, yeah, you have to go to prison for this. This isn't like, oh, get probation or help it. It's like, yeah, there's certainly retribution that's needed. It's just a matter of he eventually was sentenced to double life without parole in Supermax. That's
Absolutely.
crazy.
But this charge, I've talked on and off the record to the Silk Road prosecutors in the years since, and
You talked to Preet?
no, these are like the people like Preet is like the
Preet
boss.
doesn't try it. He's the boss, though.
Exactly.
He makes the shots.
The thing is that this continuing criminal enterprise, this kingpin statute, as it's known colloquially, does sort of like the prosecutors say that the violence that he was accused of sort of can be included in the sentencing under this kingpin statute. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how that works. I was there when he was convicted. I was there at his sentencing, and I listened to the judge in that case, lay out her argument for his sentence before she said what it was going to be. And it was extremely rational. It seemed like so well constructed, and like, I mean, she seems like a really intelligent, obviously a person. And I was very impressed. And I was like, okay, these are really good points. Like,
Is Judge Forrest? Is that Forrester?
I hesitate to say her name because it's almost like, I don't want to like call for retribution against her. She's not a judge anymore.
It's not retribution. She just did her.
Sure. Her name is Catherine Forrest, right? Yeah. But then, and she made this argument that I thought was very smart, that like, yes, you say you took violence out of the drug trade, but actually you took it only out of one part of the drug trade. The wholesalers, essentially, who were, or the suppliers of drugs, the people in Afghanistan or Mexico or whatever, who then provide drugs to the people who sold on the Silk Road, that is physical, and the violence there exists as always. Those are probably the most violent, the most violence happens at the source.
Yes, absolutely.
And then she's saying this to Ross, you actually expanded the trade as a whole. Therefore, you expanded that violence, even as you perhaps took it out of the retail part of the drug trade. You expanded it in the rest of this supply chain. So, I was like, wow, that's actually quite interesting. She made a lot of good points like that I thought were quite smart. And she said also, like, you are making this argument that you're different from an average drug kingpin out of a place of privilege. Like, you are no different from whatever guy in the Bronx or whatever who is like handling the same flow of illegal narcotics. And like,
that's a fair point.
And I'm not going to you. The fact that you have a master's degree, that you were a Eagle Scout, that you're this nice kid from Texas, like, I'm not going to be swayed by that. And I thought that was all quite like interesting and seemed almost wise. And then she says like the conclusion of her argument, which is like, and therefore I sentence you to 2 life sentences in maximum security prison with no parole. And the whole room just like, there was like a deathly silence. People just, I felt like I'd watched somebody be killed like on the spot. It was so shocking. I just could not believe that was the result that she was building towards. And
How did he react?
I couldn't see his face. I could kind of like hear like gasps in the room, you know. He was in front of me facing the judge. And I think that is not a reasonable sentence. I think it was in its own way, a miscarriage of justice. And I don't know. I'm not sure that I believe that people deserve life sentences, maybe even ever. But I don't know. Like certainly not in this case, and probably not many other drug cases, even ones where people like purportedly whatever, even tried to have someone killed. Like it's
Life is life.
yeah,
It's a long time.
and as the years have passed since then, it's like it now feels like I now see. I knew immediately like this was wrong. I did not I hope that like you can see that I have like a very nuanced view of Ross.
You
like
do. I think you have a very fair view.
I think he had ideals. Those ideals were corrupted to some degree. I believe he tried to kill people. I don't believe he deserves to be like in a cage for the rest of his life, like decades and decades to come. And
He's been in there a decade now.
right? Exactly. And like the more time that passes, like the longer that it becomes clear that that's how long life is. And the wronger it feels to me. But, I also, when I say this, I feel like it's worth saying a lot of people in prison for life are there unjustly. And
Agreed.
just the fact that, like, I followed this case, that Ross is super interesting, doesn't, like, make him, he doesn't deserve special treatment, but it is nonetheless, like, one example of a pretty unjust sentence.
Sometimes in these types of arguments, it kind of turns into everything else, where you get the 2 loudest crowds, one being lock them up forever and throw away the key, and the other being, yeah, we really shouldn't punish people, we're over incarcerated and everything. And it's like, I recognize the punishment and retribution part of it, the nuance of that, and I recognize the nuance of we're way over incarcerated and we have some archaic sentences and stuff. And like I kind of try to live right here with things, as I do on a lot of things. And it's like, as I said on this case in particularly, yeah, he had to get punished for this. It's just, I don't think it's a stretch or ridiculous for people to say that, like other cases, as you point out, that we're not talking about right now, maybe people from less privilege as well, those sentences that sometimes are handed out that could be archaic like this are wrong. And it's very hard to break down a case, period, when you're looking at who was all affected. Drug trade affects thousands of people, millions of people, sometimes depending on how big you are. In this case, I'd say it was probably millions. And it's like, how do you put a time on that? How do you put also like the value of it being shut down already on that? How do you put a deterrent on that too? And one of the things in your book is that the deterrent didn't work too well.
Not at all. And that's another thing that I heard, Judge Forrest say in that room was like, basically like, I am punishing the hell out of you to make you an example of Ross Ulbricht, to prevent, as she put it, like somebody from walking in your misguided footsteps or picking up your flag or something like that. And so he was essentially being punished not only for himself, but for the crimes of like anybody who would follow him. And that did not work at all. Like, in fact, I wrote a story at one point about this study of the dark web drug trade. And of course, the dark web drug trade did not end with the Silk Road, but the dark web drug trade on the dates that Ross Ulbricht's sentence was handed down actually increased significantly, in part just because of the people were so shocked, and the news around this life sentence was enough to actually bring just more attention to something that people still didn't know that much about at the time. This was, I think, 2015 that he was sentenced. And
I believe so, yeah.
And more just put a spotlight on the people. I think just learned from that news. Oh, you can buy drugs on the dark web, and that trade actually just continued to explode. And the Silk Road being taken down, just as happens in the drug war, created a power vacuum that was just immediately filled, first by the Silk Road too, which was a kind of copycat site that was itself taken down, in part because, as you said, it was created by people who had worked on the first Silk Road and were therefore identified
quite easily. Yeah. And that was because of how they caught Ross and everything. And that's a very interesting story. I'd love for you to recount, because you spoke with him, as you said, July 4th, 2013. I believe he was caught like 4 months later, right?
Just 3 months. Yeah, I think it was the end of October, I think.
Yeah, something like that. He was caught in San Francisco.
Yeah, and he was like, working on his laptop, the laptop, in a public library. He had like tried to work in a coffee shop and couldn't find an outlet for his like laptop, and he was running out of battery or something. So he went to the library next door in San Francisco and was like sitting there in the science fiction section of the library, working, like looking out the window in a public place, which I think he might have done in part so that even if somebody could defeat the protections of Tor and find his IP address, it might look still like it would be less identifiable because he was on some other network. I don't know. It ultimately was not a wise move, because what happened, just to like describe it play by play, I guess, like he hears these people having a fight behind him. It's like this man sort of like raises his fist to hit a woman behind him. He turns around, and at that moment, another undercover agent across the table from him, a woman, grabs his laptop while it's still open, yanks it like out of his reach. He realizes that like he's actually surrounded by undercover agents. He lunges for the laptop, but it's too late. Like another agent has got him in a bear hug, and his laptop is open, logged into the Silk Road. He's got like, if he had, as I think I said, his encryption on his laptop, so that if he had just managed to shut the lid, then it would have been encrypted. With encryption, modern encryption is strong enough that like the FBI or whoever potentially might not have been able to crack that within like human lifetimes.
Yeah.
Using the strongest computers they've got.
All you had to do was shut it.
So if he had just managed to shut the lid, he might have like prevented them from getting so much of the evidence that they used against them. He might have actually walked, like I think. But he didn't, and they got the laptop with everything. I mean, he had on this laptop a journal of creating the Silk Road, a logbook of like daily activities, all of his chats with all of the people working for him, and Variety Jones and everything. So, and a like a spreadsheet of his net worth, all of his assets and things. But as you said, like he, at the same time, he never spent most of the money that he was amassing, like the millions and millions of dollars in profits.
In Bitcoin.
He just sat on it and lived this almost ascetic life in San Francisco, like renting a room and like a house with other people. And, he when I interviewed him, even, he said to me, like, he spends almost none of his money, stays under the radar, and that was absolutely true. And I think that's because he was not, like, as I said, he's not Scarface. He was a guy with principles, doing this for some reason, some motivation other than money.
Yeah, and when they caught him, obviously they raided his place and everything, and so they found the flash drives that had the Bitcoin on it. And I can't remember now, but
a lot of it was on his laptop also.
It was on his laptop too.
Yeah.
Okay, so do they have that still today, or did they auction that off?
I think that all of the Silk Road coins were eventually auctioned. Yeah, I don't. In the years that followed. Yeah, we didn't really talk about like how he was found, though. I mean, we should.
Yeah. Let's do that.
So even though the Silk Road was online for 2.5 years, his Bitcoins were not traced to identify him. Like, it still seems as late as 2013, 2014. That Bitcoin could not be traced to like find someone. When even in his trial, when they followed the money from his server to his laptop, that seemed like cheating because you've already identified the computers at both ends, and they had identified his server, by the way, through what I think was a vulnerability likely a vulnerability in the Tor anonymity software.
That's what I wanted to ask you about.
Well,
I
yeah.
forget the details now, and I actually should have looked at that earlier. I didn't remember that before we went on camera. But there was even, obviously, it wasn't you that wrote it, but there were a couple other articles. I believe one of them was in Wired when this all like came out that did describe why like every hacker known to man, like a lot of the big names, I should say, went on record saying there is no possible way that Chris Tarbell and the cyber team at the FBI could have accessed this legally. They got this illegally.
Well,
it was in Iceland.
This was
a
very like a, I don't know, probably kind of inside baseball for the like hacker world, but there was a sort of controversy. The FBI tells the story that Ross Ulbricht just like set up Tor wrong on his server and that it leaked its IP address, which is very possible. I mean, Ross was not like an expert hacker or cybersecurity expert. You know, he did the best he could for somebody who was making it all up as he went along. But it did seem likely to me and many like other people examining the case that there was an actual vulnerability in the Tor anonymity network itself that was somehow exploited to identify this server. And that it wasn't just like Ross had made a screw up, you know. And that would be important because it would suggest that the FBI had some vulnerability in Tor, at least way back in 2013. Then when his case like was going to trial and pretrial hearings, the defense basically said like, well, if we think that you used some secret vulnerability in Tor to do this, that you didn't, it wasn't just a mistake, like, and if so, then is that a Fourth Amendment violation? You basically hacked this server, Ross's Silk Road server, without a warrant.
Yep.
And you need to tell us how you did this. And the prosecution, very tellingly, I think, did not say, like, we didn't hack it. Here's how we did it. They instead said, listen, even if we did hack it, here's why it's not a Fourth Amendment violation. And the reasons were, like, quite legalistic. Like, one was that Ross Ulbricht had never claimed it was his server, so how could it be a Fourth Amendment violation of his privacy if he won't say it's his server, which is like this terrible catch-22, you know? And then the other one was that it's located in a foreign country. It was in Iceland. It was in Iceland. Yeah. So you know, the FBI, the NSA, even whatever, can like hack a foreign server if it doesn't have an American involved without a warrant. And
didn't they say like the vulnerability was something with a CAPTCHA? Right. Something?
The story initially was that Ross Ulbricht had set up the CAPTCHA on the Silk Road.
Right.
You know, this like, you know, the scrambled letters that like you used to log into the Silk Road, that leaked the IP address. But then when that was questioned, the prosecution essentially said, well, listen, we're not going to tell you how we did it, but we don't need to. The thing is, like, even if we did hack it, like, it's not a Fourth Amendment violation. So let's just move on. And that's what happened. In fact, the defense kind of seemed like they were trapped by this. They couldn't say like, okay, well, this is Ross Ulbricht's server and he has a privacy right to it, because they didn't want to admit that it was his server. So
yeah, I need to, like I said, I need to go look at that again. I should have been more ready for that,
well,
but it just didn't look like. I think the way you just described it, like catch-22, is the best way to describe how it got through, because the way that they went to defend it made no sense, and then they fell back on the, well, then admit it's yours.
Exactly. So, and you know, anyway, so I think that there's definitely like on it, whatever. I have my own theories about how the FBI found the Silk Road server, and then they had his laptop. They actually identified Ross. They got the name Ross Ulbricht for the first time from a very like silly kind of mistake he made.
That was Alfred, right? The IRS guy?
Yeah, there was an IRS agent, Gary Alford, who was just essentially Googling, and he had seen this post of someone like seeming to promote the Silk Road on a drug forum under the name Altoid. I think this is, if I can remember correctly.
That's right. Yes.
And then Altoid had also been a username that was posting to a coding forum saying, "Can anybody help me with web development on some other project that Ross Ulbricht was doing?" And he had listed his email address in that second post, rossulbricht@gmail.com. Tried to delete it, but it was like captured in somebody's response to the message. So that was the first time that law enforcement came upon his name, and ultimately that plus the server was how they got him.
How they got to him in San Francisco. So they bagged him and everything. But you were starting this explaining about the genesis of your book, which is the Bitcoin traceability.
Right.
And I think if I remember correctly, this had to do with Carl Force and Sean Bridges, the DEA and Secret Service agents who were dirty in this case?
This is really where the story of my book begins. Like the Silk Road case is something that I covered I tell all of this in the book, but just almost like in passing to try to get to this.
Right.
So there's one IRS criminal investigator, Tigran Gambarian, was based in Oakland at the time. And his superiors were, I think, a bit annoyed that they had been left out of the Silk Road case. But then Tigran got a tip from a cryptocurrency exchange where you buy and sell, Bitcoins, whatever, for traditional money, that this mysterious guy, Karl Mark Force, was cashing out hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Bitcoins from some unknown origin through this exchange. Couldn't tell the exchange where they came from. It seemed kind of fishy. Tigran immediately figured out Karl Mark Force is one of those Baltimore agents investigating the Silk Road. He was a DEA agent.
He was undercover. He was with Ross.
He had been undercover on the Silk Road, yes. And Tigran, the IRS agent in Oakland, starts digging in, and he's like, I think that Karl Mark Force was on the take essentially from the Silk Road. Karl Mark Force, also believing that Bitcoin was untraceable, was like doing the kind of typical corrupt cop thing of like just grabbing whatever money was available. And also even there was evidence that he had started to encrypt his conversations, his undercover conversations with the Dread Pirate Roberts, so that even law enforcement couldn't read them. Karl Mark Force was secretly communicating. So, this looks really suspicious, but Tigran is like, I just need to prove that he's getting paid, that Karl Mark Force's dirty Bitcoins are coming from the Silk Road. How am I going to do that? Everybody tells him Bitcoin is untraceable. That's not going to help you. And Tigran, working for the IRS, being a forensic accountant, the IRS Criminal Investigations Unit is a division, is kind of a strange animal. It's like these forensic accountants who also like have guns and
people don't know about this, but very real.
And so he also is like he's somewhat of a computer nerdy guy as well. And he had looked at Bitcoin and thought this blockchain thing that powers Bitcoin, it does seem like it has every transaction listed there. Like I must be able to figure out which addresses. The blockchain only includes Bitcoin addresses, no identifying information. But he's like, I can see money moving from address to address. If I can just crack this, then maybe I can follow the money and prove that where Karl Mark Force's Bitcoins came from. So he essentially did this, him just with no training. He just sort of invented techniques on the fly, was actually working in his living room with his baby daughter in his lap after hours. And he traced Karl Mark Force's money, this DEA agents, and proves that he had been paid by the Dread Pirate Roberts hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Bitcoin, and that he was essentially acting as a double agent inside the DEA, selling investigative material, information to the Dread Pirate Roberts as a mole. And that was the first time this case.
What about Goniger though and Chainalysis?
Well, yeah. So even then, after Karl Mark Force had been identified as the first time anybody was ever identified through cryptocurrency tracing as having done something criminal, even after this DEA agent Force was identified, there was still another sum of hundreds of thousands of dollars of Bitcoin that was missing, that everybody could see had come out of the Silk Road, but nobody could see where it had gone. And Tigran, everybody else on the case, his prosecutors and everybody thought the Karl Mark Force must have taken that too. Tigran was the only one who thought this looks different. It's the way that the money is moving here looks like somebody else. He traced that money too and found that it was a second corrupt agent, this time a Secret Service agent, also in Baltimore, that there were two dirty agents, one acting as a mole, one just stealing money from the Silk Road.
So he was Secret Service, but he was working directly with Force. Like they were both there for the Curtis Green thing, right?
Amazingly, they were not even aware of each other. It was just like seemingly a coincidence that they, or maybe, who knows? I don't want to like cast aspersions on the culture of law enforcement in Baltimore, but like,
but they made the wire already.
But they both like seemed to believe that they could get away with this because of this myth that Bitcoin was like untraceable money, that you could just grab as much of it as you wanted and nobody could follow the money and prove what you had done. And they were both wrong, and they both spent time in prison. And
they both got like 6-7 years, I think, right?
They're both out now, I guess. So I think like a bit less than that, but close to that, yeah. But as you said, in that second case, Tigran had met this guy, Michael Groninger, this Danish guy.
On the Sean Bridges case, you're saying?
Yes, and they Michael Groninger was like a sort of old school Bitcoiner who had worked at a cryptocurrency exchange, like very technically brilliant guy who saw the potential to actually, who not only saw that like Bitcoin was traceable, but built a company and a very specific tool called Reactor to do that. He was the founder of a company called Chainalysis,
right,
which today still is like the leading cryptocurrency tracing firm. But his very first real case was that he kind of consulted with Tigran. They worked together and traced that second corrupt agent's money, Sean Bridges, the Secret Service agent.
And what is it that he figured out again? There's something to do with when you do a Bitcoin transaction on the blockchain, there's a sending wallet, a receiving wallet, and I don't think it's called a wallet, but a change address. Is that it?
Yeah. So to be clear, like Michael Groninger, not to complicate things too much, but he was not the one who came up with all these techniques. There was a woman, Sarah Mickeljohn at University of California, San Diego, who was an academic researcher, and she was the first one with her co-authors of this paper that was published even before the Silk Road was taken down, that showed that there was this kind of bag of tricks that could be used. I mean, the blockchain looked like, if it wasn't anonymous, it was at least pseudonymous. Like you could see money moving from address to address, but if you couldn't figure out who owned which address, then you can't follow the money. You can't prove anybody is involved. But she started to think of tricks that allowed you to connect somebody's identity to their blockchain, to their Bitcoin addresses. And you were just describing one. I mean, an even simpler one is like called like, basically it's called multi-input transactions. This sounds technical, but it's pretty simple. To spend the Bitcoins at a certain address, you have to control the key for that address. Mm-hmm. If you spend all the Bitcoins at multiple addresses at the same time, then you must control the keys for all those addresses if you do that in one transaction. So you look at that transaction and you say, I can see that every one of these addresses must have been controlled by the same person or organization. So you're already starting, instead of looking at a bunch of like distinct addresses, you're like looking at groups of addresses, clusters is what she calls them, that all must belong to one person or service or something. And then another one is change addresses. Like there is, I think, this property of many Bitcoin wallets that when you spend all the money at an address, you can't just spend a fraction of it. You have to like smash open the whole piggy bank, send all the money to the recipient, and then get change back for whichever portion of it you didn't intend to spend. That change goes to a new address. If you can identify that new address as the change address, often because it looks very new, and the other address that the money went to is not new, it's like somebody who's received money there before, then that change address, you can tell, that change address belongs to the sender, because that's where they got back their change. Oh. So then you can follow the money from like, the original sender to their change to where they send it again. And this is called a peel chain, because it's like, this is Sarah Mickeljohn's term for it.
Right.
A peel chain, because it's like you've got this wad, or like a roll of bills, and you're like, you take one bill out of the roll, hand it to somebody, then you put it back in a different pocket, but it still belongs to you. You put the rest of the bills back in a different pocket. Then you pull it out again, you spend one more, you like peel off a bill, then you put that wad of bills back into another pocket. But that wad of bills always belongs to the same person. Now, if you can follow that wad of bills until it hits a cryptocurrency exchange, or even go back in time to see like where it originated, like where somebody spent dollars to buy that wad of digital Bitcoins, then you can, if you're a law enforcement agency, send a subpoena to the exchange and force them to hand over identifying information a lot of times.
Is there a way? Sometimes when I start thinking about this, especially when we visualize the actual process like that, in my head, temporarily I'll mix up like exchange with like what isn't considered an exchange and everything. But maybe a good broad question here is that while this takes a lot of work and is hard to do, the bottom line is that this can be done, and governments, for example, can trace Bitcoin transactions. But is there a way that you can do, let's just stay with Bitcoin transactions and not be traced?
That's a really good question. I read Sarah Mickeljohn's paper and I was like, oh, I see. Like sometimes it's possible. I read it in 2013 when the Silk Road was still online, when everybody still believed that it was possible to spend Bitcoins in an untraceable way.
But you were still surprised at trial in 2015 when they said they did it?
Well, see, like that's the thing. Like I read that paper and I was like, I see. Like it's if you screw up and leave these traces, then you can they can follow the money. But anybody who's smart, like would find ways to avoid that. And so it seemed like it was still possible if you stayed a step ahead to avoid that kind of tracing. And because like
it's like they never traced Satoshi that we know of.
Well, I think that is actually because Satoshi never spent any of his Bitcoins or cashed them out or had to interact with an exchange or did much of anything. I mean, but it is true. He's like he or she or whatever is the one individual who has defied like every attempt to identify them.
Yeah, so it sounds like, and I could be putting words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like the answer's no. Like it may take a long time with some because there's sporadic transactions or limited history or whatever, but they could eventually use the two chains that are occurred. I don't know if they're chains, but the two addresses, that occur within a transaction. As long as one has ever happened, they can figure out the geographic location where that came from, perhaps.
Well, the thing is, like, if there is a cat and mouse game here, I thought that, like, yeah, look at this paper, like the cats have some cool tricks here, but if you're a smart mouse, you can stay ahead. It turns out, I mean, as cat and mouse games do, this just like kept evolving. And the thing about the blockchain, this permanent record of every Bitcoin transaction, is that if the cats like come up with a new trick, it's not just that like they can use that from that point on to like trace new transactions. They can go back in time, look at the blockchain stretching back years, which cannot be changed or erased. It's copied out to thousands and thousands of computers, and identify illegal whatever transactions you were trying to hide years ago. And so no, I no longer have much confidence of any kind that you can do a Bitcoin transaction with enough secrecy that it will withstand that test of time. That like at no point in the future will these rather brilliant investigators, like people like Sarah Mickeljohn, and then Chainalysis, this company that was created by Michael Groninger, I mentioned earlier, to kind of like weaponize her tools to build them into software, and like has now been able to recruit all of the smartest forensic people to build on these tricks and like constantly find new ways to trace Bitcoins.
It's just so fascinating to me though, because like I'm trying to cook up scenarios in my head, probably doing a horrible job, but if I have a USB drive that is my Bitcoin, which I do, right? It's a drive. It doesn't exist on the internet. I have to plug it in and whatever, but I got that one day. Let's say that some dude somewhere bought it and left it somewhere, and he didn't know who I was, and I came to pick it up for a predetermined sum of money or whatever, and then I go and I use that drive that was made by some manufacturer, obviously, so that part's traceable, and I go somewhere else in the world and I start using it. Like, could they... They
Well,
could find that?
how did you get those Bitcoins in the first place?
That's a good question. That's where I'm starting to think about what I
Like,
need.
did you buy them from an exchange?
Yeah, so you're saying, okay, there's the question.
That's usually the cash in or cash out point is where people get caught.
Right, so it has to be through the exchange because they can subpoena the exchange's information to get the address, any fill in the blanks that they need.
That's definitely like the most common way by far. I guess that it's also possible to, I mean, the other trick that Sarah Mickeljohn did was that she started doing essentially undercover transactions with services in the Bitcoin economy. So she moved her own Bitcoins into and out of the Silk Road repeatedly. Remember, this is when the Silk Road was still online. And then she would be able to see, oh, my money went into that address, and that must be a Silk Road address. And because she had those clustering techniques, she could then see that's not just one Silk Road address, that's part of a cluster of millions of Silk Road addresses. So she then could identify millions of addresses and then see people's Bitcoins going into them and identify, oh, that's a drug deal, that's a drug deal, that's a drug deal, pretty much. Then the question is like, who are those people doing those deals?
Right.
And yeah, you're right. Like most of the time you identify them through an exchange. In other cases, like people back then especially would like post their Bitcoin addresses publicly, like soliciting donations or whatever.
But if you don't have that, I guess I'm saying.
Yeah. The thing is, like, there's not that many. Like, I guess if you mine the Bitcoins, that's potentially one way to do it without identification. Not that many people mine their own Bitcoins and then use them in a drug deal. Most people buy them from an exchange. And when you buy them from an exchange, almost always you have to give some identifying information.
So if they mine them, not necessarily, but mining also takes not only significant energy and power and skill to do, but it happens slowly. You can't just mine 100 Bitcoin like that.
Yeah, I don't think there are very many people who, it's not something that I've like thought about that much or I hear about much, but I suppose if you wanted to be incredibly careful, you could mine Bitcoins yourself. I'm not even sure how this works anymore because back in the early days of Bitcoin, you could just mine Bitcoins on your own computer. Today, most people contribute their computer's processing power to a mining pool where like you're helping, you're sharing your processing power, and then you get back like a fraction of the rewards. And so that might mean that there is something traceable in the way that you receive that money from the mining pool. So I don't know. I'm not sure that that's even that is a solution. I haven't really examined it enough, but it's so rare. I mean, the people who are buying drugs on the Silk Road, and we didn't get into this, but I as an experiment for Forbes, bought marijuana from 3 different dark web drug sites, including the Silk Road. And of course, I did not mine my own Bitcoins. I bought them from Coinbase, which was like an exchange. And then as an experiment, once I read Sarah Mickeljohn's paper, I gave her all my Coinbase addresses in a kind of simulation of like if she had subpoenaed Coinbase, this is what she would get. And I told her like, see what you can you trace my drug deals? And she immediately was able to identify this amount of money went to the Silk Road. This one went to this drug market. This one went to this one.
See that? You know what though? Now that I put that visual on it, because everyone knows Coinbase or is aware of most people are aware of what Coinbase is. That doesn't seem that hard. That's very believable.
And this was still in 2013, so even then, I believed that there was some privacy still possible with Bitcoins. But and then even in the trial, as I said, I was kind of surprised that I was surprised that they'd used this because I'd never seen it before, but it kind of still made sense and it still seemed like kind of an easy tracing case.
What platform had they used within like the Silk Road community to buy and sell Bitcoin? Mt. Gox?
I think a lot of people did because that was all that existed in 2011.
That was the only one in 2011?
I think so, yeah. For a long time, there was just Mt. Gox. Then, it's interesting you bring that up because after the Silk Road case and the case against these 2 corrupt agents, which was truly like the first proof of concept Bitcoin tracing criminal case, The next big case that Chainalysis and Tigre and Gambarian, this IRS agent, took on together was the theft of $500 million worth of Bitcoins from Mt. Gox, which by 2014 had been like completely pillaged by unknown hackers. Actually, nobody even knew where the money had gone, but had been bankrupted by what was either insider theft or hacker external theft of this massive sum of Bitcoins. And Chainalysis took on this case to figure out where that money had gone.
And the Frenchman who was in charge of that place was Mark Karpeles, is that right? Mark
Karpeles was the CEO of, and the creator of Mt. Gox.
So
actually, I'm sorry, he was not the creator. He acquired it.
Mt. Gox was where, as you said, it was like the main exchange. It was where people went to buy and trade Bitcoin on the markets. And again, I keep on in my head, I'm trying to think of something else with that I'll ask you about later, but I'm going to say it wrong if I do right now, so we'll stay on this. But in 2014, suddenly, in what was to that point the biggest hack in the history of cryptocurrency, the platform was hacked and, I don't know, 600,000, 800,000, some ridiculous number of Bitcoins were stolen. And the accusation was quickly, Karpeles might have been behind this, embezzled it out himself. But very quickly, the guys who you spoke with in your story, which was the IRS agent along with Goniger over at Chainalysis, they were brought into the case, at least Goniger was at first, and concluded that Karpeles was just incompetent and had left vulnerabilities and that, no, this was out there and they needed to go find it.
Exactly. I mean, Goniger, this Danish guy
who... I keep saying Goniger, sorry.
Goniger. Who I mean, it's not even... I'm sure I'm saying it wrong, too. It's a Danish name. But, he had now seen the potential, in some of Sarah Mickeljohn's tricks, and then he had... Chainalysis very quickly, started getting, venture funding and stuff, and was able to recruit, super smart people who were not publishing their findings about how to trace cryptocurrencies, but were keeping these tricks secret in some cases. I mean, you and I can talk about how you trace Bitcoins and what I know about how to do it, but there are definitely now secret sauce techniques that Chainalysis will not share with anybody about how they do it. So he actually, just as Chainalysis was getting started, took on this case pro bono. He actually, I think, saw it as a way to help Bitcoin survive. I'm going to help figure out who took this money so that we can solve this case, show that it's possible to hold people accountable for stealing massive troves of Bitcoin, and also show that that this is the criminal sums and this is the criminal money and this is the clean money, and the whole Bitcoin economy is not awash in criminal money because banks don't want to touch that. They don't want to be accused of money laundering. So he took on this case, and at the same time, it happened, as you were getting at, I think, that Tigre and Gambarian was taking on a different case, which was this other shady exchange called BTCE. This is a strange coincidence almost. BTCE was by 2015 or 2014 this other competing exchange that had become a kind of destination for all kinds of criminal cryptocurrency. You could see on the blockchain money flowing into it from all sorts of, from the dark web, from ransomware, which was a new phenomenon where hackers were extorting people.
Are you saying the government could see this when they look using their tracing techniques?
Exactly.
Okay.
Tigre and Gambarian, Chainalysis too, could see this. And yet nobody knew who ran BTCE. It was this very mysterious, weird exchange that was existing out there, but nobody even knew where it was based, who had created it. It was this strange black hole in the whole Bitcoin economy. And it was actually getting very big. It was, I think, rivaling Mt. Gox in size when Mt. Gox went offline. Was
So they had
collapsed.
An incentive.
Well, it's more than that even. So this is where the cases kind of strangely converge. Tigran and Michael Groniger were working separately, and they'd worked together on the Sean Bridges case. But then Michael Groniger, in his kind of pro bono capacity, helping out the Mt. Gox bankruptcy trustees in Japan, where they
that's where it's based.
He traced those stolen funds from Mt. Gox on the blockchain, and showed that a big chunk of them were going into BTCE. And at the same time, Tigran essentially was working on the BTCE case, and together they kind of, once they saw that their cases were once again kind of there was a kind of combination, a confluence of events here, they figured out that somebody named WME that was their kind of pseudonym, was feeding all of this hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoins into BTCE, and that WME was an administrator of BTCE.
How'd they figure out he was an admin?
I'm trying to remember like the whole investigative like process here. I think essentially Tigran, being a law enforcement agent, had figured out where the BTCE server was located. And of all places, it ended up being like in Virginia, just miles away from where he was then working in DC, and actually set up a kind of like essentially a wiretap on that server. I mean, I think maybe it was more just like an image. They had located and copied the contents of it.
Quick question on that though, because I remember this in your book, and I remember going, that's kind of weird. But you said that he said, Tigran, he immediately ruled out that this was a honeypot CIA experiment or something. How do you immediately rule that out when you find the server 4 miles from Langley?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we can't rule it out. Maybe the CIA was involved in running this shady exchange. Who knows? It's kind of like regardless, BTCE was, whether it was a CIA operation. I don't know what like the end goal would have been, just knowing where the story goes from there. Right. Or whoever, it was located right there in Virginia. I think that Tigran ruled it out just probably because he comes from law enforcement and doesn't, is maybe not as skeptical of like intelligence as you or I might be. But by like essentially finding the server, which was not that well hidden. It was just like this was an exchange that was on the open web. So you just had to have law enforcement capabilities to do that, and getting an image of it to get like all the contents of it, which they did stealthily so that to not like tip off the administrators. Right. He could see like that. He could see all the accounts of the administrators, one of whom was WME, and all their communications. And then working with Groninger, who was following the money, and also had the Mt. Gox, this is a bit complicated because some of the money that was stolen from Mt. Gox was actually cashed out through Mt. Gox too.
Wasn't it like they found part of the reason he ruled out Karpeles was because then they found like 200,000 Bitcoin or something like that? They were able to get it back?
That's this is another part of the story that like...
That's not the same thing.
The Karpeles like... after this whole bankruptcy, was like, oh, I found like another, was it 200? I think 200,000
something like that
Bitcoins. Yeah. But also, Groninger could see when the Bitcoins that were stolen were being cashed out, like what times of day, and just as a kind of loose. This is not like a definitive clue, but like he could see what times of day this was happening, and it seemed to be happening in essentially like, Russia, Middle East time zones, not where Karpeles was based in Japan, or in fact, like any other, anywhere in the U.S. And he immediately started to suspect that once you see that time zone, that in fact this money was stolen by somebody in Russia, because that is,
right.
That's always where we think of like these hackers being located, and unfortunately that puts them beyond like the reach of a lot of law enforcement, but. He and Tigran Gambaryan then essentially combined their data and together showed that WME was both an administrator of BTCE and the person feeding the Mt. Gox millions into BTCE, that the same person had been involved as the kind of money launderer for the Mt. Gox hackers, that it was like working as one of them, as had created BTCE. Then in fact, likely BTCE, this whole exchange was created just as a way to launder the Mt. Gox like heist, essentially. And then through other like kind of like investigative techniques. They found like some slip ups where WME had at one point like revealed his real name. Tigran also did a lot of like kind of more traditional internet detective work or law enforcement work where he tracked his IPs around the world and eventually like found a hotel where WME had checked in.
And this is Alexandre Vinnik?
Turned out to be Alexandre Vinnik, this Russian guy. So now this is essentially like the solution to the Mt. Gox mystery, as far as anybody's ever cracked it, that Alexandre Vinnik was not only like the kind of money man, he's now been convicted of this essentially, for the Mt. Gox hackers, the one who was sort of like his job to like take the money and clean it somehow. But also he had, perhaps not alone, but had created BTCE, a whole exchange that became itself a kind of extremely criminal Bitcoin exchange, cryptocurrency exchange, just for the purposes of funneling this money into it. Like it's just an incredible kind of ambition to create. It's almost like creating your own bank or your own Wall Street trading floor just to kind of like, funnel in your money that you as like a mafia don are end up with on this as a problem. Like you have this liquidity problem, so you create a whole financial institution to launder it. That's what Alexandre Vinnik is accused of doing. He's been convicted of money laundering. He's now, he served time in France of all places. Now he's been extradited to the U.S. So, I don't want to he hasn't faced charges here. I don't want to. He's innocent until proven guilty of this stuff, I guess. But
you're so fair. It's fun.
He also, I interviewed him through his lawyer in prison, and
oh, really?
He claims his innocence, and he says he was set up, but whatever.
You gonna testify for him at trial?
I don't testify for anybody whenever possible.
I'm kidding.
It's funny, like that's come up in another case in the book, and like I politely declined to get involved.
Fair enough. Yeah. So they bottom line is they end up finding this whole other exchange, and I'm getting it mixed up, but he comes back with the, what's it called? I Want Video or something like that.
This is that's a case that comes back later and comes up later in the book. Where it was essentially, maybe we'll get to this, but it was a massive dark web market for child sexual abuse videos,
and he was allowing that market to exist.
Well, it turns out that BTCE would play a role, that this like very criminally tainted money laundering crypto exchange was helping, was being used by some users of this, essentially what we used to call child porn dark web site. And that is that will come up later in that case. Okay. But in the meantime, what was more important, and this has not really been told like very publicly before. I don't think Chainalysis never even really revealed their role in this case. But Michael Groninger and Tigran Gambaryan solved the mystery of where that Mt. Gox money went, and essentially helped to vindicate Mark Karpelès, who had been accused of stealing all this money. And instead they showed that it seemed to be like at least a Russian connected group of hackers that had taken it. Now that, I don't think anybody's got back their Mt. Gox Bitcoins, but because it's still it's kind of tied up in this endless legal limbo. But that was the kind of first case where, the Silk Road corrupt agents was the proof of concept. Mt. Gox was the case where it became clear just how powerful these tracing techniques would be, that you can often crack what seem like, cold cases. And I would say that's kind of the beginning of this new era of the golden era of cryptocurrency tracing, where people like Tigran and Michael Groninger at Chainalysis would just be involved in...
Their clients are the government, effectively.
Right. Chainalysis sells its techniques to exchanges where they kind of are trying themselves to not be used for money laundering. They have their own laws they have to follow and stuff. But then also, yes, Chainalysis has all these government contracts, and they work with every law enforcement agency practically, and they've become a secret weapon for cracking so many kinds of cybercrime and just illicit activity. If it involves a blockchain, it can be traced. It's the exact opposite of what, I and even perhaps Satoshi and so many other people thought in 2011. Cryptocurrency is extremely traceable. or at least Bitcoin is in many others. And that has been used as a incredibly powerful lever to just like crack open so many what seemed like uncrackable cyber criminal cases.
See, if that's true, and it clearly is, by the way, it's kind of inarguable that if people take at least certain actions, and there's a lot of little actions they can take that open that up, like, yes, it can be traced. But we think all the time, not just Satoshi, who you already laid out, technically didn't send Bitcoin anywhere, so it's not really applicable. But when people put on their tinfoil hat, that I don't really think is much of a tinfoil hat, and start thinking about, all right, who are the powers that be in the world, be it governments or individuals associated with governments, etc., who don't want to see things like Bitcoin or crypto in general succeed, you got to think they're out there as fronts buying into these things. I mean, that whole Do Kwon Luna thing, that was one of the most obvious government psyops I've ever seen in my life. I mean,
Remind me who that is.
That's the dude, and I'm really uneducated to talk about the full ins and outs of this, but that's the guy who ran Luna and the whole platform that crashed. I'm trying to bring it back to me. Maybe this was like 6 months ago, something like that, where essentially he was creating a stable coin that was benchmarked to Bitcoin. So what happened was when the House of Cards came down, it also pulled the price of Bitcoin down, which, as we know, Bitcoin is the one cryptocurrency out of all of them that doesn't have like a centralized company or something around it. We don't know Satoshi. It's this totally like government can't just go in and like invade Bitcoin. So they have to find other ways in. And so when you see what this kid was trying to do, it just seems fairly obvious that like clearly this was a way to attack the currency. But what I'm getting at with the traceability is that if you had, let's just go with governments as an example. If you had China and the US and Russia, that would probably, Russia, I feel like Vladimir Putin was probably early to some of this stuff. But if you had governments like that out there buying Bitcoin, hypothetically people like Gambarian and stuff would know that now because they'd be able to trace it. But there has to be a way that they're deep enough and far enough away without any identifying markers as far as who's doing the buying on their behalf that we haven't figured out who the quote-unquote 5% whale of Bitcoin is or something like that.
I do believe that, I mean, Satoshi is like, whatever, exhibit number one. It's possible to mine a ton of Bitcoin and sit on it, never do anything with it, and perhaps you cannot be traced. Or it might be possible with like just enough restraint or enough just like doing as little as possible with your coins to use them anonymously. But this is what I have essentially thought over the years. Well, okay, so you can be traced if you do this, but if you do this, then you'll be okay. Oh, well, actually, no. It turns out they figured out a way to trace that. Oh, if you put your money through a mixing service that like mixes up your coins with other people's and then sends back to you like untraceable coins, that should work. Oh, actually, no. It looks like they can defeat that. In fact, they busted many of these mixers themselves. Oh, well, what if you like maybe like flashing forward to almost more like the present day almost. What if you use Monero, a coin that is designed to be untraceable from the start and builds in its sort of mixing capabilities into the protocol of the coin itself so that every Monero transaction is mixed up with other people's transactions and has all these privacy, untraceable, properties and features. At least that must be untraceable. Actually, well, it looks like, I mean, the evidence, this is Monero people don't like it when I talk about this, but there are cases where it appears very likely that Monero was traced. And I've seen a leaked Chainalysis presentation documented, like it was this is like flashing forward almost like the end of the story of the book, but where the Italian police received a presentation from Chainalysis. The leaked presentation is in Italian, where they say that they can trace Monero with some probability, if not certainty. And that's often good enough because as a prosecutor, you can then just start sending out subpoenas to every possibility. That people don't realize that like you don't have to, it's not like creating some different possibilities or confusion is not enough.
Reasonable cause is enough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the story, I just I do still actually believe that it's possible to use cryptocurrency untraceably. I don't think it's possible with Bitcoin. I don't think it's possible with most cryptocurrencies. The only one that I truly am like confident saying today is untraceable is Zcash, which maybe I don't know if you've heard of it. It's like it fully encrypts its blockchain, uses like very clever new fangled kinds of encryption to do this. Uses something called a zero knowledge proof so that you can essentially like confirm that a transaction is real and happened on the blockchain, but without revealing any information about it. But sorry, this is like beyond my like sort of technical capacity too, but Zcash does appear to be untraceable. But then again, like I remind myself sometimes, I thought the same thing about Bitcoin back in 2011. So every time that I've thought like, oh, this seems like we actually, this seems like if that wasn't untraceable, at least this must be. The cats like catch up in this cat and mouse game.
But if some, and maybe I'm thinking this wrong, but I'm just trying to play hypothetical here. If somebody on behalf of, let's say, the U.S. government, let's make it simple. Somebody goes on, gets a brand new wallet, makes a huge purchase, maybe over time in a bunch of tranches, to the same wallet, takes it off chain. So they take it off the server, right? So in this case, they would never use Coinbase, but let's just say it was Coinbase. Take it off Coinbase and they put it somewhere. Well, now it's on a flash drive. No one can see where it's going, and then it switches hands a bunch, gets to the right people, gets to Jerome Powell at the Federal. I'm just making it very easy. Gets to Jerome Powell at the Federal Reserve. He then has it. You can't you'd have to do a whole case behind the scenes to find out that he's the one who actually bought it. But hypothetically, it could be done, but they could set it up in a way that makes it like impossible to get there. Governments, I'm saying.
Well, the thing is, like, you might not sure, you can like take your Bitcoins out of an exchange, put them at an address that you host yourself, where the keys for that are on your USB drive. Hide that in a popcorn can under the floorboards of your bedroom closet. This is actually
that's like, literally what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that happened. This was a case described earlier this week. But by the way, but it doesn't matter because the fact is, like, if those coins, like if they can then subpoena the Coinbase, the exchange where you got those coins, they get your identity, they like figure out, oh, like the coins moved to this address. We don't know where the keys for that address are, but we know the name of the guy who holds them. So we're going to go raid his house and we'll look under all of his floorboards and find your, if
it's still there. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, what actually I'm referring to is like earlier this week, a guy who hacked the Silk Road in 2012 and stole 50,000 Bitcoins from the Silk Road because of a vulnerability in it, then sat on those coins for a decade, was identified. He was identified last year, but the Department of Justice just announced this. He was identified, I think, because he had interacted with an exchange, probably cashing out like a very small amount of those coins. But that was enough for them to get his identity and literally find these Bitcoins on a hard drive under the floorboards of his bedroom closet.
And this is brand new.
It happened they revealed this for the first time on Monday. So when they seized those 50,000 Bitcoins from him in November of last year, they were worth $3.36 billion because he had sat on them for so long. But it's also just a testament to the fact that like the blockchain had recorded his transactions years ago, and that was enough for him to be caught. It's just.
Okay, I have sorry, I was making a face there, but I have the article up here. Mm-hmm. So this is the one you're talking about? This is last... Yeah, looks like last week.
That's the case, yeah.
How is it... I was confused about how did we get to... Because I see the number here too. How did we get to 3.36 billion when it was only... Oh, that's not a point. That's a comma. Never mind. Because I was reading it and it looked like it said 50.676 Bitcoin, but it says 50,600. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now it makes sense.
In November of last year, at the time of the seizure, 50,000 Bitcoins was $3.36 billion,
Right.
which at the time, at that time, would have been actually the biggest seizure, not only of cryptocurrency, but of any currency of any kind that the Department of Justice had ever made. But then actually just a few months later, they did an even bigger one. But I don't know if you want to get into that. There was like this, this is like comes right at the end of the story of my book. So it's not a story I really tell. Like this biggest case of all time is just one that unfolded just as I was finishing the book, so it's only mentioned like in the epilogue. But there was this case of this New York couple. Maybe you've seen like the rap videos of one of the woman in this couple. She goes by Razzle Khan, and she and her husband, who was like a Russian American guy, were accused of laundering $4.5 billion worth of bitcoins that were stolen from yet another exchange, Bitfinex, and.
Is that the guy? Is that where the general counsel Frost was from?
Let's see. Frost.
Who worked with? He was the guy who caught Carl Force on the DEA agent on the Silk Road case. He was going back and forth with him because he was the general counsel, and he was like, "This guy's sketchy." And he went to the government. It turned out it was one of their own, and then they talked about.
He was working in a different exchange, Bitstamp.
Bitstamp. Okay.
Yeah, he's the one going back to that story. He was the one who gave Tigran the tip that he saw these dirty bitcoins coming in that led to like the takedown of these corrupt agents. But this was a different case. Like 2016, I think, is when maybe 2017 was when Bitfinex was hacked. I think 120,000 bitcoins were taken in that case, and at the time of that, those were seized in early this year. $3.6 billion at least was recovered of the $4.5 billion worth stolen.
I did see this case. It's coming back to me now.
It's mostly gotten a lot of attention, not just because of that it's set this record, but also because the woman in this couple had made these like egregiously cringy rap videos. I mean, like truly.
Yeah, they're not great. They're not great. I remember this now. So they had like 95,000 Bitcoin or something like that.
I don't know. I can't remember the math, but it would have been $3.6 billion worth that was taken in that case.
But why didn't...
And by the way, that was IRS Criminal Investigations who did that case. Chainalysis won't say that they were involved, but they were almost certainly involved. And it's the same people who are the subjects of my book who carried that out. I mean, they just truly have broken their own records,
broke the code.
One after another.
But the original one you were talking about that they just announced, where the guy had it under his floorboards and everything. Why are they just announcing that now if they did it exactly a year ago?
Because I think he just took a plea agreement.
Oh,
he just took
so
a
that's
guilty
how we found
plea.
out.
Yeah,
interesting.
I mean, the poor guy like hacked the Silk Road in 2012. And sat on the money for 10 years and now faces like time in prison and had to forfeit all of that money.
It's a tough day. But you know what? You couldn't take like 10 million of it just to like you had 10 years. Take 10 million out of there, do something.
Also, maybe just like run off to some non-extradition country.
I know. Go to Russia, do something.
Yeah. I think he was in Georgia, and that's where
Georgia, the country?
No, the state, unfortunately for him, where and that's where his popcorn can full of 50,000 Bitcoins was found as well.
Tough day. And it's actually reminded me when you say that, I had on John Boseak, he was one of the biggest credit card scammers from America during the heyday of carding. And I was reminded of it when I was reading your book because Vinnick, who was WME, one of the creators of BTCE that we were just talking about, he was a Russian guy, and it said that he got his whole start in carding. Like that's what he was.
I think maybe you're thinking of actually, this is a good segue into like the next major case of the book, but you're thinking of Alexandre Kaz.
Oh, I am. You're right. Yeah. You're right. Okay, so yeah, we are going to talk about AlphaBay.
Actually, no, I'm sorry. You are correct. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to just like inject a segue. But Vinnick also had a carding background.
Maybe I read it on both. I can't remember.
They both did. But then like the next like sort of major case of the book is, I think of him more as like a carder who became the next dark web kingpin.
Right. So just right before we get to that, though, because this was a quick aside, just bringing it up, I talked with John a bit about the history of carding, obviously, and how all that blew up because credit cards obviously became a huge thing in the 90s, and then as the late 90s ended and got into the 2000s and things were extremely computerized, this entire industry just took off. The heyday was during the 2000s for sure, which is when he was in it. But a lot of the guys in it were from Russia and Ukraine, and that's always been like the thing. And I think, if I remember correctly, the way he explained it is that in a similar way to how in China, for example, they excel at math more than us because their numeric system is much, much better. Like, it's easier for a younger kid to learn the full system as opposed to us, where we got to change the language at each 100 and 1,000, whatever. But he was saying it's like a similar thing with the Russians and Ukrainians with coding, where there's certain things in their language that are easier than to translate to being able to code something as opposed to when we learn it.
I've never heard that before. I don't know. That could be.
I might have made that up. I feel like that's what he said.
I would just say, like, culturally, these ex-Soviet countries have they have like a history of amazing education in math, computer science, and then a lot of poverty, and that is a mix that creates like incredible criminal hackers,
Okay.
Plus just the corruption of governments there historically is like meant that you can hack people like in the West where the money is, and perhaps pay off the right local guy.
Oh, and they won't extradite you or anything either.
There's no extradition treaties,
right?
Especially in Russia, much more so than Ukraine today. I mean, that this is no longer true since the kind of like bifurcation of like Russian and Ukrainian geopolitical paths.
Right.
But Russia is absolutely that story. But it's interesting to note, and maybe we can get into this at some point too, that like credit card theft is certainly still happening, but like Russian cyber criminals now, since the advent of cryptocurrency, really have very much switched over to ransomware as an even more profitable kind of hacking, where you lock up, as a whole network of like inside of a company or a government agency or a hospital or a school or like whatever, and it demands a cryptocurrency ransom.
Right.
And that's actually like a much faster way to get paid for your hacking. It's a much more disruptive and like, truly dangerous and terrible for society form of hacking, even than credit card fraud, I would say. But you don't have to like figure out what to do with all these credit cards, figure out how to use them for fraud. You just get paid by the victim right away.
In what we now know is a traceable transaction.
Yeah. So that I feel like I'm skipping ahead in the story.
It's okay.
But I do try to, in the book, examine like, if cryptocurrency is so traceable, why is it that ransomware remains? This is sort of the like near the end of the book. Like, why does it remain this scourge on society? I mean, I'm sure you're like aware of some of the. I mean, everybody has seen like the ways that it's just been like this plague where like one company after another coughs up like millions and millions of dollars in extortion payments just to try to keep doing business. I mean, the biggest example was the Colonial Pipeline. That's the one ever like the most disruptive, where this company that controls a pipeline that distributes gasoline to like the whole eastern seaboard was hit by ransomware, and they had to shut down the pipeline essentially, and that caused like this fuel crunch and huge disruption across the East Coast. And turns out that like they actually even had paid the ransom. They paid these hackers $5 million. That is one case actually where the FBI was able, with Chainalysis's help, by the way, to follow the money, figure out where it was, and recover millions of dollars of it, not the whole amount. They haven't really said how that was possible. The problem is that even if you can follow the money, if it goes beyond U.S. borders, or if the hackers themselves are in Russia, you're still stuck. Like that just means that you can watch yourself getting robbed, see where the getaway car went to, but it's totally beyond your reach. Like the tracing alone is not always enough. Even with Alexandre Vinnik, the Russian guy, like convicted of his involvement in the Mt. Gox theft, he only got caught because he went on vacation with his family to Greece, and that's where he was arrested and extradited from.
Right.
So like if they're smart enough to like stay in a non-extradition country and not go on vacation in like the wrong place, then they're untouchable, and like tracing is not enough. That's why I think
They don't care about being caught, essentially. That's interesting, though. But like, what about like the North Korean government hackers? Like
it's another example I think of. Like they're not likely based most of the time in North Korea. They're based in China, usually is what I'm told. But again, there's no extradition treaty with China. Then China is supportive enough of North Korea that they're not going to, hand over North Korean hackers, even though it is very often possible, I think, to trace these North Korea doesn't use ransomware attacks most of the time. They just steal massive amounts of cryptocurrency, billions of dollars worth of it per, on a yearly basis these days. And they're using that to fund, horrific things in the Kim regime, including like, their nuclear weapons development. And that can be traced, and Chainalysis can follow that money, but you can't do anything about it because
right. They don't care. It's purely transactional. They're looking to get in, get their money, and then they don't care if you catch them. They already have the money.
Right, and you can't extradite them. You can't lay hands on them. So you can follow the money, but that just again tells you exactly how badly you're being robbed and like how much all of these cryptocurrency companies are accidentally funding the development of nuclear weapons in North Korea. It doesn't solve the problem. So that's just to say that like tracing is not a silver bullet. Like it seems extremely powerful for actually identifying the culprit, but sometimes the culprit can't be caught still.
It's a geographical problem at the end of the day.
Absolutely,
and a geopolitical problem.
Yeah.
Interesting. So we left off, though, with the actual outline of some of the things in the book, because there's a ton in the book that we're just not going to get to today, and people are going to have to buy it. Again, check out the link in the description, Tracers in the Dark. But the Vinnick story kind of got left off because, again, he wasn't in those the extraditable countries and whatever, and so they knew who he was, but they couldn't really do anything about it. They'd uncovered essentially who was behind the Mt. Gox hack. But in the meantime, after Silk Road goes offline in 2013, you had mentioned there was like Silk Road 2, and some of the people who had been involved in Silk Road launched at least that platform and maybe another one in the year afterward, but they were quickly caught because all the data on who they were was on Ross's laptop.
And also actually because there was another vulnerability in Tor. That one was like confirmed. And in 2014, that was used in like another kind of like just roundup of a bunch of dark websites. In a lot of cases,
the government found a vulnerability, essentially, you're saying.
It was actually like this group of reachers at Carnegie Mellon who then gave it to the government.
Son of a bitch,
pretty
really?
well confirmed. Yeah. And in that case, like a lot of those dark web drug markets taken down with that vulnerability it was just a server that was found, and it wasn't the actual administrators. Nobody was like arrested and jailed in many of those cases, as far as I know. But with the Silk Road 2, they were, in part because their identifying information was on Ross Ulbricht's laptop.
Okay, so because they knew who they were able to get them, but the other ones, they were able to at least get in there through a vulnerability and shut down.
Right.
However, there was one that rose up that went beyond the scope of Silk Road. Silk Road, as we laid out, did mostly drugs. It had some guns on there as well, some hacking tools a little bit, and that was pretty much it for the most part.
So like as we were just talking about, Ross Ulbricht's like life sentence was meant to deter the next dark web drug lord, but that did not work. And Silk Road 2 popped up, then another site called like Evolution took over, and then Evolution actually ran off with everybody's money just to show their lack of sort of, Dread Pirate Roberts principles, if you want to describe him that way. And then that site was replaced by another one, which went offline. And then the real subject of like really like the centerpiece case in some ways of the book, this market comes online called AlphaBay that would eventually grow to be 10 times the size of the Silk Road, transacting like millions of dollars of drugs a day. But the interesting thing that we were getting at is that like AlphaBay, what sort of got its start as a carder dark web site. Like it was founded by this guy Alpha02. Nobody knew who that was.
That was his username.
But Alpha02 was a known sort of notorious credit card fraudster who had even published like a guide to credit card fraud. But then Alpha02's kind of like big idea was to combine the dark web sphere of credit card fraud and drugs into one massive market, which would become AlphaBay.
And what year is this approximately?
So AlphaBay launched, I guess, in, let's see, was it 2015?
I'll check.
It was 20.
That sounds right. That sounds right.
For a long time, it was not like particularly distinguished. It was only in late 2016, or around like actually the middle of 2016, that AlphaBay became the biggest dark web drug market when like other sites were going offline.
Yeah, it says this is straight off Wikipedia. It says it reportedly launched in September 2014, pre-launched in November 2014, and officially launched December 22nd, 2014. So roughly the end of 2014.
Right. But then, so it launched, but was not distinguished for years. And then only after these other sites went offline did it kind of begin to grow, not only into the biggest dark web market at the time, but the biggest dark web market ever. I think it was around mid-2016 that it surpassed even the peak size of the Silk Road and was still growing. And at this point, like law enforcement is looking at this site. I mean, they've taken down the Silk Road, they've taken down all these other sites, but this one seemed somehow to like not have made those mistakes. Like it didn't have the vulnerabilities, like and essentially Alpha02 began to seem like this kind of potentially untouchable figure. Like I've heard this from prosecutors and investigators, like there was this real fear that maybe this time they've encountered somebody who they cannot reach. And it has a lot to do with what we were just talking about. Alpha02 gave this impression of being Russian. There were no real rules on AlphaBay except like no child porn, no child sexual abuse materials. No murder for hire allowed either. But otherwise, anything goes. There was no victimless crime here. Like you could sell people stolen data. Like, that was a huge part of the business.
Yeah.
But you could not sell the stolen data of Russians or people from the former Soviet Union. That was a rule on the site. And it seems like that was a kind of don't shit where you sleep principle.
Yes.
Like this must be based in Russia. And Alpha02 would even sign off his messages with a Russian sign off, like Be Safe Brothers, but written in Cyrillic Russian. And so there was this fear that, this guy what if he is in Russia and the site is hosted in Russia and we'll never be able to reach past that kind of, as you said, like geopolitical boundary.
Does Russia ever, well, not now, obviously, given everything that's going on, but prior to invading Ukraine, do those conversations at least happen, though? Like, is it possible that if someone's caught on either end, U.S. or Russia, that we have examples of where people did get sent from one to the other?
I think, like, there was a period, I think, when there was cooperation. And then my a friend, Patrick Howell O'Neill, wrote a great piece, I think, for MIT Tech Review about a case where, maybe the first case where it kind of all fell apart. And like the American, probably I think the FBI, sorry, this is not my story, but had identified these like notorious Russian cyber criminals and were trying to get the Russians to cooperate in extraditing them. And
oh my God, what's this called? Operation, this is like 2011, 2012, 2013, something like that.
I can't remember the dates.
This was the thing where John got caught, like for the final time, because there was a joint, and we were laughing because this would never happen today, but there was a joint operation, FSB, FBI, somebody else, and they were taking down specifically like the international carding industry.
I'm not sure if it's the same case. It could be, but the in this story, at least, this is one where it seemed like the FSB was cooperating, and then they essentially let the cyber criminals like get away from right under their noses. And the Americans had like gone as far as like traveling to Russia to get these guys, and in some ways like put the nail in the coffin of like any notion of cooperation with Russian law enforcement. But that's a historical story that I didn't tell, and everybody should check out Patrick Howell O'Neill's story.
Patrick Howell O'Neill. Where'd you say he wrote that again?
I think it was MIT Tech Review.
O'Neill, MIT Tech Review, Russia, U.S. carding. Let's see if we can pull it up.
I'm not sure it was carding. It may have been like a different kind of hacking, but
Yeah, I can't find it right now. So we'll have to look that up later.
I can send you a link. You can put in the notes or whatever you'd like.
Please, that'd be great.
But yeah, there was this notion that Alpha O2, this guy must be Russian, and therefore we'll never get him. And people like talked about him as like this. One prosecutor described him his like the impression of Alpha O2 at the time as like the Michael Jordan of the dark web. Like, what if this guy is just so smart and so careful that we just will never catch up with him? And it was like around that time that they got their first real tip that was kind of the beginning of that AlphaBay
And how did that
case.
happen? What was the tip?
Yeah, so it was very much like what happened to Ross Ulbricht in a way. In the very first days that AlphaBay was online, it turned out, 2014, as you just looked up, years earlier, before anybody really cared about AlphaBay, because it was just one of many of these dark web sites. If you signed up for the user forum on AlphaBay, you would get a welcome email. And that welcome email's metadata included this email address that it should not have included, which was pimpalex91@hotmail.com. And some tipster, some like dark web sleuth had signed up in those first days before this thing was fixed. And it was fixed very quickly. And just kept that email for years as AlphaBay grew into the biggest dark web market ever. And then just before Thanksgiving of 2016, tipped off the DEA, sent this tip to, like, of all places, like a DEA agent in Fresno.
Voluntarily?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who the tipster is. I've never. That's been very like carefully kept from me. I think that, of course, like
Makes sense.
Law enforcement agencies don't want to reveal the identities of anonymous tipsters. But yeah, I don't know what that person's motivation was. But that was the first kind of crack. And
that was the guy, Robert Miller, he sent that to in Fresno?
Right. I mean, Robert Miller is also a pseudonym for a DEA agent who didn't want me to use his real name.
So
but yeah,
we'll
call him Robert Miller. And he had done some sort of like pretty rudimentary dark web cases where he'd busted some dealers, essentially. The Fresno office of the DEA and the prosecutor there had like a dark web task force, and they had done some pretty clever but small scale things like using mistakes that dealers had made to identify them, and like then tracking them down. But they never expected that they would be the ones to go after the kingpin of AlphaBay. Right. But as they like kind of scoured the web with this email address that they now had, pimpalex91@hotmail.com, they began to find this, this trail that Alexandre Kaz had left. He had used this email address, for instance, on like a Canadian social media site, and they could see that he had been this like hip hop sort of wannabe as a teenager. He was from French Canada, from Quebec. Mm. And then they followed it further. They found his LinkedIn page where they could see that he'd kind of cleaned up, become a web developer, had his own web development company, a front company.
Yeah, right.
Eventually, that would be revealed. And then they found his fiance's social media and saw that he actually now lived in Bangkok, had a Lamborghini Aventador, seemed to own a villa in Phuket.
He owned several places, right? I think
eventually they tracked all of this, and they found that he owned like property in Antigua, Barbuda, and like Grenada and Cyprus. I mean,
he was not like Ross Ulbricht.
No, he was enjoying like his dark web like profits in a way that Ross Ulbricht never did. But even then, like they weren't. I mean, yes, like a web developer like owning a Lamborghini is not like the expected. That seems suspicious. And they had this email address, but even so, like they wondered, like were they being set up? Like they had to ask themselves, the agents and prosecutors in Fresno, like, what if this tipster has even set us up? Like, what if Kaz is being framed and like to take the fall for Alpha O2?
Yeah, because it's kind of, that was the thing about this. It was almost strikingly easy to get there.
Exactly. And often when something is that easy, like it does seem like it must be a setup. And I think that they felt that too. And so that is when cryptocurrency becomes part of the story again. And it actually was happening like in a totally different thread, in a different place. Like the Fresno office had no idea how to trace cryptocurrency in that way. But at the same time as they were chasing this like too good to be true kind of lead, it happened that these two FBI analysts in Washington, D.C., who asked me to call them just Ali and Aaron, not no last names, were also trying to find the kingpin of AlphaBay and using cryptocurrency tracing. And Chainalysis too, of course, like by this point, every Chainalysis customer is like asking them, can you help us to at least like chart out what part of the blockchain is being used, what belongs to AlphaBay? Like which of these millions and hundreds of millions of addresses at this point are AlphaBay addresses? And Chainalysis was like devoting years of work to this. This was not easy. Like AlphaBay had learned from the Silk Road, like in many ways, the Silk Road would like take everybody's transactions, like mine in that experiment that I did, and pool them together into like a few addresses. So that made it easy, using like the same multi-input transaction trick that Sarah Mickeljohn came up with. You could see that all those addresses must belong to the Silk Road. But AlphaBay never did that. And in fact, AlphaBay advertised to its users that it very cleverly tumbled and mixed their coins. And actually, what the real trick was that it kept them all in these distributed addresses, never pooling them into one big account. And that made it very difficult to say like that any particular address was an AlphaBay address.
So they were hypothetically, at first glance here, finding a way around those tracing methods.
Right. I mean, the cat and mouse game had advanced for sure. And Chainalysis had to spend like years trying to figure out like what the fingerprints of AlphaBay were on the blockchain, and never told me actually even what most of those were, but they gave me like an example, which was that AlphaBay essentially like had a fee structure. When you send Bitcoins, you can like pay a fee, and the bigger the fee, the faster your transaction is confirmed by the whole Bitcoin network. And AlphaBay, it turned out, had this particular fee structure where like the bigger the payment you were making, whatever drug deal you were doing, the bigger the fee was. And this was a particular like sliding scale that Chainalysis figured out would serve as a kind of fingerprint that they could use to, I think probably one of many, to start to like build out the picture of which addresses belonged to AlphaBay. And by like late 2016, they had like 2.5 million addresses that they had determined belonged to AlphaBay.
And when you say belong to AlphaBay,
well, exactly, they belong to like buyers or sellers or administrators on AlphaBay.
And how big was the ecosystem at that point? Because I think it was like within a year, AlphaBay's daily revenues were higher than Silk Road's was ever at its peak or something. But like, how many users did they have roughly?
You know, I don't. The numbers that I have in my head are like that. Is more like daily transactions. The Silk Road at its peak, I forget exactly how much, was doing like hundreds of thousands, like mid, like 300,000 or 400,000, I think, a day in transactions. By mid 2016, AlphaBay had surpassed that, and then by mid 2017. They were doing millions of dollars a day. And I do know that by mid 2017 also, flashing, this is like skipping ahead a bit, they had 10 times as many users as the Silk Road had, like registered users. So according to the FBI's like numbers anyway. So yeah, this was like a, it is just like another level of, and in fact, arguably the dark web drug trade, the dark web black market has never even equaled that sense, kind of depending on like exactly whose measurements and how you measure it. AlphaBay was truly like a singularity. But right, so I mean, if picking up where I left off,
please.
AlphaBay, Chainalysis had figured out the AlphaBay cluster more or less, but then you still have to trace. You have to figure out who Alpha 02 is within that cluster, and then trace out his money to a real person's name. And that is what Aaron and Ali, these two FBI analysts, figured out how to do.
And they use, so if I remember what you said at first there, they figured it out, but they used Chainalysis to like confirm it all for them or like get them all the way.
Chainalysis allows you to follow the money, but to figure out whose money to look at, they had to come up with their own clever tricks. And it was really, I think it was Ali's idea. And that was that, what if we like look at all of these sums that we know are associated with AlphaBay, and you remember that I mentioned like one of the earlier markets had pulled off an exit scam where the administrators like run off with everybody's money.
Yes.
They realized that whenever an exit scam happens, that spooks the whole dark web. Like everybody pulls out their money from whatever market they're on because they realize, and they're like constantly telling each other, everybody in the forums is like, never store more money on the market than you're about to spend because it can just be taken by the administrator. And the only person who would not be spooked by these exit scams would be an administrator himself. Like the boss doesn't have to worry about an exit scam. He is the one who pulls off the exit scam.
Right.
So what if they thought, like, what if we look at, across this, all of these addresses and find like a cluster within the cluster of like a large amount of money that sat unmoved even as exit scams occurred. And we just start looking at those. And soon they did find a cluster that seemed like really suspiciously large, had sat unmoved for, during exit scams. And then they started to trace out the tendrils of that money to see where it might hit an exchange. And they actually got as far as like tracing it to an exchange before they heard the tip that Alexandre Kaz was the suspect for Alpha 02. And it was after they had sent out the subpoena, they heard Alexandre Kaz's name. And
through their grapevine.
Through their own grapevine, through law enforcement. And only after that did they get back the results of this subpoena, which revealed that it was Alexandre Kaz that had cashed out that money, that their technique had worked, and that they essentially confirmed Alpha 02 is this guy, Alexandre Kaz, this like Lamborghini driving French Canadian eccentric dude in Bangkok.
Yeah, so he's in a foreign nation. Did Bangkok have extradition stuff with
Very
the
much
US?
so, it turns out. Yeah, like I think Alexandre Kaz like probably, I don't know why he went to Bangkok really, maybe just because it's nice there. But like he it was the opposite of, it turns out, like the non-extradition treaty Russian haven that they thought he was in. Bangkok, it turns out, is like very friendly with the DEA.
And they have a lot of people on the ground there.
Yes, very much so. And like in the DEA office in Bangkok, I would learn when I visited even is like the center for all East Asian operations for the DEA, which has more, I think, more foreign agents than any other U.S. law enforcement agency. The DEA has like a huge presence abroad, but in particular in Bangkok.
What about, do other agencies share a similar presence in Bangkok as the DEA?
I'm not sure, but like the what I learned just by this like little capsule history when I talked to the agents there and visited for when I was reporting all this out, is that that golden triangle of, I think it's like, what is it? Thailand and Myanmar and maybe China, southern China, had become this source of heroin that actually we all, like, I think, have heard of Vietnam vets who became addicted to heroin.
Yes.
In many cases, that like white China heroin was coming from the Golden Triangle. Vietnam veterans would get addicted during wartime in the 60s and the 70s. Yeah. And so before the DEA, it was even created this, I forget what the precursor, like the earlier agency that would become the DEA was called. They focused on Bangkok because that was where a lot of this heroin that was getting Americans addicted was coming from. So that was like one of their first priorities as an agency. I just, kind of learned this like from just as I like dug a little bit into the history there. But
yeah, and they were smuggling it out too. That was the other problem. Like that's how
Absolutely.
Frank Lucas filled all the streets in New York with heroin. He was bringing it in. I believe it was in like caskets.
That's right.
From Vietnam.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that story. But definitely, like this White China, like this Golden Triangle region was a huge source. I think of like more than half of all opiates at the time. I think it was then surpassed, by like Afghanistan and whatever. But nonetheless, like Kaz was in the wrong place. Like this was the opposite of a non-extradition country. But it was still like he was a very like smart guy, and the story I tell in the book, like it's one of the like more detailed cases because he took really smart security measures. He knew better than to. I mean, you could tell that AlphaBay was better at like obfuscating his cryptocurrency, despite the fact that was still used to confirm his identity. But then also he had learned from Ross Ulbricht, you don't work on your laptop in a public place, and he had full disk encryption on his laptop, but never even opened it outside of his home. So that was like a huge challenge in trying to take him down. That eventually like led to this incredibly elaborate sting operation where they knew that they had to not only grab his laptop, but grab it in an open state in his home.
In his home.
Yeah.
Wow. What was it? Aaron and who was the other pseudonym?
Ali and Aaron, yes.
Ali and Aaron at the
agents.
FBI. So when they traced it back to him, and then they confirmed that on another investigation out of Fresno, with the DEA, due to a tip-off, they also had traced it back to him. Obviously, now they know they have their boogeyman, quote unquote, who's Alpha 02. This is what, like end of 2016-ish, something like that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So how long until they had to do the sting, and like what was the planning? Like what was the full story there? Like how did that go down?
Well, I should say that even in the midst of this, there was this other case that Fresno and DC, those two branches, like did kind of join forces. But then at the same time, I mean, this case is so like epic and it's kind of global scope. But these Dutch agents were tracking the second biggest dark web market ever, used cryptocurrency tracing to find the servers of that market, which was called Hansa, and hatched this idea. I mean, the Dutch are like truly like very aggressive in their law enforcement operations like this. They came up with a plan to not just take down the second biggest dark web market, but to take it over, to run it themselves undercover. And when they found out that the Americans were going after the biggest dark web market, AlphaBay, they essentially proposed that they join forces and create this 1-2 punch, this incredibly like ambitious thing where they would take down AlphaBay, the biggest dark web market, and then secretly control the second biggest market so that all of the refugees from AlphaBay would flow into Hansa.
Oh, they get like a net on the back end.
While it was under their control, and they would be able to surveil and identify all of AlphaBay's users on Hansa, the second biggest market that they were secretly controlling. So this plan like took a little while to coordinate and hatch. But then there's still like as I was saying, like the challenge was, how do they get Kaz? Like how Kaz, the Alpha 02, and catch him red-handed in the same way that Ross Ulbricht was.
Right.
And one of the tactics that really allowed them to do this was that they figured out that Kaz had a third alter ego as on this kind of pickup artist alpha male forum, where he was known as Romeo. He was like a fan of raw dogging, and that was the unfortunate. Excuse me for like explaining all this, but
no, you can say it's a rated R show. You can say what you want. That's funny.
And he was like just absolutely live blogging his sex life on this like alpha male, pretty gross forum.
How'd they figure out that was him?
It's interesting. I don't actually know how they initially. I mean, this Romeo character, this other pseudonym, was like sort of bragging about his like living large in Bangkok, having a lot of cryptocurrency, having a web development firm, which was the front company. So
there you go.
All these like things kind of pointed to him. But then, as always, it's about following the money. In this case, it turns out that Caz was paying for a premium account on Rushvi, and they subpoenaed his PayPal account, found that he was paying for this account, and that Romeo, Alpha O2, Alexandre Caz, they're all one person. And that actually, aside from just like, you know, the fascination of like law enforcement agents at the DEA and FBI like poring over the details of this guy's sex life, it also, he brags as Romeo about his laptop encryption and how he like, you know, has done this as like his perfect OPSEC, operational security. But then also as Romeo, you could see when he was online because Rushvi, this forum, has like an icon next to every username, and it's, you know, if it's green, that means they're active at that moment. So the DEA, it actually was like a DEA agent in Bangkok figured this out. She became
It's Jen Sanchez.
Exactly, Jen Sanchez, who was like the kind of most like, I don't know, most deeply involved DEA agent in Bangkok, perhaps. Her boss, Will Guzman, was like part of the case as well. But she was the one who figured out that you can see when he's online. And that means you can see when his laptop is open, it turns out. So that was a huge, I mean, this like, you know, I think that Caz probably, the Dread Pirate Roberts had like this public persona. He loved to spout all this political philosophy and stuff and sort of soak up the adulation of the Silk Road community. But Caz was not like that with AlphaBay. He was very much like all business with his drug market. So I think he needed an outlet to sort of like show off, and that was unfortunately for him like this essentially like a sex forum where he just bragged about all of the Thai women that he was picking up at his Lamborghini and sleeping with like on in these extramarital affairs.
Always comes back to the pride, man. Some way or another comes back to pride,
like
and
hubris is like the downfall of all of these guys. And Alpha O2 was so careful, but Romeo was like not. You know, his other alter ego was where he truly kind of got caught in a sense, because that allowed them to trace his movements. They could like see that he would like basically, they would like follow him physically, see that he would like pick up somebody in his Lamborghini and take them to his second home or to like a love motel. And then they would see him like live blogging the sex that he'd had the next day. So and all this stuff. So that allowed them to hatch this plan that involves like half a dozen undercover agents, most of whom were Thai. The Thai police and the Thai's like equivalent of the DEA was hugely involved in this too. So on July 5th of 2017, they assembled this whole kind of undercover operation with somebody pretending to be a gardener, somebody pretending to be like an electrician working on a telephone pole. And then an American DEA agents, the one, Will Guzman, who I just mentioned, was pretending to be like shopping for real estate with his Thai wife at the house next door, all of this. And then this other couple, two women, undercover Thai female agents who were pretending to be like just having taken a wrong turn down to the cul-de-sac where Caz's house was. I mean, all of this is happening at the same time. It's kind of ridiculous. They drive this Toyota Camry down the cul-de-sac and then pretend that they're lost and are trying to turn around and then crash their Camry into Caz's front gate, which is all a ruse designed to get his attention, to pull him out of his house and hopefully get him to leave his laptop open. And they do this, of course, when they can see that green icon on Rushvi is active. Like they know he's logged, he's there. But at the same time, by the way, I didn't even tell this like branch of the investigation, but they had to identify the AlphaBay server, which they did. This is actually Tigran Gambarian and Chainalysis who did this.
Back at the IRS.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Who like came up with this still secret technique to identify the AlphaBay server, which they are now trying to like access an image. Maybe we can come back to like the technique they used, but however they did it, they found that it was in Lithuania. They have agents in Lithuania at the same time who can see that Caz is logged in to the server, and then accidentally pull it off. They actually accidentally crash the server as they're like examining it. And
This is prior, obviously.
this
to
happens
the
just
sting.
minutes before the whole sting that they're planning.
Wait. Were these guys? Was Tigran and Chainalysis aware that the sting was going down?
Definitely. I mean,
Okay, because I know they were at a separate organization.
initially, like they when they found the server, when they used the secret technique, Chainalysis had no idea that the bust was planned for just days away.
Okay, so
By this time, by July 5th, it's all coordinated. Chainalysis is no longer involved, but they helped to find the IP address of the server. So
they unintentionally crashed this, obviously.
exactly, and they're now thinking, oh my God, like Caz, he's gonna know something's up. He's just gonna shut his laptop lid, and that'll be enough for us to be screwed, essentially.
Hold on, real quick though. That way that they found in there, that secret way that they're not sharing, is this another potential government warrantless problem?
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of the the reporting like of this book trying to figure out that secret technique, and I do explain what I'm pretty sure it was at the end of the book. Whether it was illegal, like I haven't really. So first of all, Caz is a Canadian. Does that, Caz is Canadian. He's in Bangkok. The server is in Lithuania.
Mm-hmm.
Could they catch him with this? Even if he were American, would he not face that same catch-22 as Ross Ulbricht? Like he's got to claim it's his server to have any privacy rights to it. I mean, it's a weird like paradox that you can catch these people in. But also the fact that Caz is a Canadian living in Bangkok. I'm not sure he has like that the U.S. law enforcement has to get a warrant for his server.
I don't know how that works, because then if they try him out of the U.S., though, isn't he?
I don't know.
That's a law question, legal question.
It ultimately wouldn't matter.
Wouldn't matter. We'll get to that.
But
yeah, people can read that in your book. That part, the rest of that. That's fine. I just wanted to know if there was something possibly there.
It's both like a good, I don't know, kind of reveal, but also maybe we shouldn't spoil it. But it's also like a bit of a technical story. So, but like I think I did figure out what they did, and that's a kind of like surprise reveal at the end of the book. I actually, just in the very last phase of the reporting, I think I mentioned a leak from Chainalysis earlier, and that is how I figured that secret technique out as well. Okay.
But anyway, they crashed this server right before this is going, minutes before this is supposed to go down.
So then everybody, this whole team, and there's like 6 undercover agents on Caz's block surrounding his house in different ways. Like the DEA agent and his fake wife are in the house. They've got eyes on his house as they pretend to shop. Like the DEA agent is like trying to distract the real estate agent while his partner is upstairs, like, doing surveillance on Caz's home. And then they have a feed of like a real-time video feed from the DEA agent's car, from the Toyota Camry also. So there's a whole war room of agents and prosecutors, Americans, who are a few miles away in Bangkok watching all of this unfold. And they're like, oh shit, the server is down. You need to take him now. And that's when these 2 agents in the Camry crash it into Caz's gate. And that's kind of like the beginning of this like very quick succession of events where first it didn't work. I mean, they could see that he opened like the window of his bedroom slightly. And they're like, oh, we got his attention. Maybe he stepped away from his computer, but it's his wife, who is, by the way, 8 months pregnant, who comes down. And they have to like do this whole pantomime of like the undercover agent who had crashed the car was like, oh, I'm so sorry. Can we pay for the damage? Can you please get your husband to come down so I can figure this out with him? And Caz does come down in like his gym shorts and shirtless and shoeless. And
they go into the house.
Well, at that point, the fake driver for the real estate shopping couple comes out, and he kind of like, I mean, it's an elaborate story, but like, basically, he kind of pretends to be helping Caz with the gate, but then somebody gives a signal, and the guy who was the electrician, I believe, starts like puts on a police vest and starts like sprinting towards Caz to arrest him. And at the same moment, another agent who was hiding in the backseat of the real estate shopping couple's car comes out. Caz, as when he sees the agent running towards him in a police uniform, realizes what's going on, like tries to spin around. He knows he has to get back in the house to his laptop. But at that point, like 2 and then 3 of the agents are like wrestling with him. The one who was hidden in the back seat, he goes by the nickname M, and he kind of breaks free, allows the other cops to like wrestle with Caz, and M just knows that his job is to sprint into the house through the gate that's been like, opened.
Yeah.
Up the stairs. He's actually like studied the layout of the home. I mean, this is all, very carefully planned, and takes steps 2 by 2. He thinks that the computer is going to be in the guest bedroom, and he busts into the room. It turns out that Caz had like guests from Canada who were sleeping in there, and he wakes them up, and he's like, oh, sorry. And he turns around, goes into the master bedroom, and finds that Caz's laptop is there and still open and alive, logged into AlphaBay. The whole case is cracked. But that's Caz is arrested. They've got his laptop. He, like Russ Ulbricht, even had like a net worth, spreadsheet on the computer. This is like a different kind of, it's like the hubris of full disk encryption. You think you can store this stuff.
Yeah, do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Because they're never going to get it. But he got caught the same way.
Pretty much. It was just like that much harder because it was in his home, But they did get him. He's taken to Thai jail, essentially. He agrees to extradition. And then a week after his arrest, he's found dead in his jail cell.
Alleged suicide.
Right, yeah. So, of course, U.S. law enforcement, Thai law enforcement say that he committed suicide. He hung himself.
A lot of guys hanging themselves in prison these days.
His mother, his defense attorney, of course, say that he was killed.
What? Now, there's a question. What are they getting at? Are they getting at like, okay, he was Alpha O2, but there's someone behind this whole operation or something? There's governments behind it. There's boogeymen, whatever.
I don't think anybody who would claim that Caz was murdered knows who murdered him or has even like a strong theory. But yeah, the idea is that what if like maybe Thai cops were on the take to protect him. Once he got caught, they killed him to keep him quiet. Maybe he did have a local partner. Maybe he was tied up with the mafia. I mean, I did hear from one of his friends that he was like cashing out Bitcoins at one point through the Russian mafia in Bangkok. I don't know. I don't know
cool.
what that means. But like he had like kind of liquidity problem. Like he had more cryptocurrency than he could deal with. Obviously, that's what got him caught eventually, that he was cashing out through exchanges too. So, and they ultimately traced like more than a dozen of his exchange accounts in his name and his wife's. But yeah, maybe he had like a local laundering partner too, or something like that. And that person had him killed to keep him quiet. Who knows? I also don't know if he was. I'm not claiming. I couldn't figure it out. I went as far as like spending hours and hours with all of the Thai officials, the detectives and the agents and the people in this agency who like masterminded the operation to get him. I even talked to the jailers on duty, and yet I still don't know the answer to this question.
They have security footage?
They do, but it's missing about half an hour.
Oh, yeah, very convenient.
This is the thing, and of course, his defense attorney says the same thing. Like, you're kidding me. Like this, you've got, and I've watched and showed his defense attorney a video of the last minutes of his life where the Thais shared with me. I mean, I didn't even know that there was going to be video in his cell, but they brought me down to the jail. Like when I was interviewing the agents in this DEA equivalent office in Bangkok, the jail is on the first floor. They brought me down to the first floor. I met the jailers. They were like, "Yep, he was right here." Like, and I can see the video, the cameras. And so I asked them to share the video, and they did. They shared a coroner's report as well. And yet the video shows him, kind of sitting in his cell. Then you see him go off screen. By the way, his cell, the way that this happened was that his cell has a small internal wall with a bathroom behind it. It's like a 3-foot high partial wall with a little swinging door. And he goes behind that door, and you can actually see him just barely sort of messing with the towel somehow, which was what was used or what suffocated him. And then that clip ends, and the next clip is you see Thai police and then Jen Sanchez, who we mentioned, who's like the
on site looking at his body.
Yeah, running in like in a panic, seemingly like looking over this internal wall at his dead body, which has been choked out by a towel fashioned into a noose. And I truly, I appreciate that you're a skeptic. I'm an agnostic on this. I did my best to like figure this out, and I do not know what happens. And his defense attorney also was like, well, taking a step back, even like Jen Sanchez, the DEA agent who found his dead body, it was like, I know exactly how he did it. He tied his towel into a noose, got the end of it wedged into the hinge of this 3-foot high internal door, and then leaned forward to cut off his air supply. The defense attorney is like, that's impossible. Nobody can suffocate that way. His body is not even suspended. This is a noose that's 3 feet off the ground. Then I actually did a lot of really gross, grisly research into how, these kind of in many cases, the research is based on accidental deaths from autoerotic asphyxiation. And it very often happens with bodies that are not fully suspended. I don't want to get into too much about how to kill yourself, but it just seems dangerous to talk about that. But suffice to say that I was convinced by talking to a lot of doctors even about this, that or reading the literature, and that it is possible to kill yourself this way.
The fact that he was going in there, and it appears based on the tape that he was playing with the towel, and we have that on video, makes this sound a little less suspicious and like he legitimately did. But I mean, who do I gotta fuck to make sure that when someone kills themselves in prison, that doesn't happen to be the 15 minutes where the camera's not working?
I know. And it's so, but it's like Thailand is not a country where police are held accountable, so I can kind of imagine, and this is what I was told essentially, that the video shows Kaz messing with the towel, going into the back of his cell where he's hidden, and then the next action is people running in to find his body. And between those two moments, there's about half an hour where nothing happens, and the Thais say that they just deleted that because it shows nothing. So, I mean, I think Americans hopefully would know better than to delete the evidence that
apparently not
vindicates. Well, yeah, exactly. But that's a different story.
It's a different story.
Very different story. So, I don't know. I don't know what to believe, but I do. I don't want to attribute to malice what might have been ridiculous incompetence.
Yeah, it could be open ended. Sure.
Yeah, and that's where I've left it myself.
But that ended the case because they had Alpha too. What happened? Because he did have other people on the site similarly to Silk Road who at least reported to him, right?
They have Alpha 02. They took down AlphaBay, and at this point they had, as I said, taken over the second biggest dark web market.
So they send everyone there, the Danish
and
one.
just as they planned, it worked beautifully for law enforcement anyway. That thousands and thousands of refugees from AlphaBay flooded into Hansa, the second biggest dark web market, not knowing what had happened. It was all kept secret. I mean, it was a full, I think, days before even it was clear that AlphaBay had been taken down by law enforcement. People thought it might be an exit scam. People thought it might just be downtime. That happens with websites on the dark web in particular. And so they all flooded into Hansa, and registered there, and Hansa had been turned into this just like absolute surveillance death trap for its users because it was completely top to bottom now controlled by Dutch police who had taken the roles of the administrators, and they proceeded to just like do every evil trick they could think of. They had all of these users under their control. It was like such a rare situation, and they really did do everything they could think of to. You're not supposed to be identifiable when you visit a dark website, even for the dark web administrators themselves. But if you turn that dark website into a trap and like change its code,
yeah, they can. They hold the keys. They can do what they want.
Then you can start to set these traps for people, and that's what they did. I mean, they did things like you when you make a dark web drug deal, you are supposed to encrypt your address, but by this point, dark websites had features that would automatically, in theory, encrypt your address for you. But Hansa had been like recoded so that it would record your address before it encrypted it, of course. And
so they got everybody.
They
had them all.
Right. And they even like did a thing where they tricked all the dealers on the site into downloading this file where there was like an icon. The Hansa icon was loaded by pulling the image from a server under Dutch control. So that would like essentially reveal the IP address of everybody who opened that file, like a kind of, beacon, Trojan horse.
Wait, does that get their IP address even if they're using Tor?
Well, that's the thing. Like they would be using Tor to visit Hansa, but then they load this file on their computer, and that pulls in the image not over Tor, and therefore it reveals them. So they got like, dozens and dozens of the biggest dealers on Hansa who were coming from AlphaBay exactly this way. They also like did a thing where they tricked everybody into uploading like new images to the site of their drugs that they were selling. And there was supposed to be like an automatic way of stripping out the metadata that includes the locations sometimes of a photo. And instead, they, of course, recorded that metadata. So they like all of these different tricks were used to identify the dealers. And over the next, it's not.
Did they extradite all these guys to the U.S.?
All the dealers?
Yeah.
It's not really clear exactly like what the, like how that, all of that data, which was collected essentially by Europol. The Dutch police collected this data, then handed it over to Europol, and it gets like fed into like U.S. systems as well. And then it's just like this is such a global operation. There were then like 3 different major busts of dark web drug dealers over the subsequent years with like all these different code names. Like I forget what they were all called, like Saboteur. They all have like Tor in their clever names, and hundreds and hundreds of dealers were arrested in these. So it's not I think that they almost probably purposefully obfuscated which ones were identified through the Hansa operation versus other techniques. But suffice to say that like there was an enormous number of takedowns that followed around the world. I mean, a lot of these people were not extradited; they were prosecuted in their own countries too.
Just a massive success for multiple governments, though. At the end of the day.
It was also just like the biggest psyop ever performed against the dark web because
that we know of. But yeah,
sure, yeah. Against, in particular, the drug part of the dark web markets, because it was like you cannot even trust the people in charge of these dark web markets. Like even the like Dread Pirate Roberts of whatever Hansa himself might be a Dutch police officer, and that instilled a lot of fear. It took like a very long time for the dark web markets to recover from all of that chaos and paranoia.
See, we know about like, for example, the dirty DEA cop and the dirty Secret Service cop, Force and Bridges from the Silk Road case. Like, there's some that obviously become a part of the story, but I'm always curious with all these sites how many people were unknowingly doing it on behalf of an organization. Like, I will tell you, one place my head goes with like Alpha O2 is that he was an agent for somebody doing something. Like, it's possible, at least,
Certainly. I talked to the prosecutors and all the agents who led that case, and I don't know. I spent enough time with them that I don't believe they're lying when they say that they actually intended to extradite Caz to the U.S. and flip him if they could. They were going to actually, they wanted to turn AlphaBay, or, you know, at least probably they had already taken down AlphaBay, but to turn Alpha 02 into an incredible informant,
Right.
and use that to, you know, do other kind of like stings and traps, but he was dead. So and they really saw that as a huge disappointment. I mean, I don't know if Caz was killed or who would have killed him, but I don't believe actually that the U.S. DEA and prosecutors and FBI and IRS, like Tigran and Gambarian, any of them would have wanted him dead. They wanted him on Team USA, as they say.
That actually makes sense.
Yeah.
So it could have been with someone else.
But you're absolutely right that like they wanted him to be the kind of asset that you're talking about, but unfortunately for everyone, he died. Whew. Yeah. And so, as you say, like, you know, was there something extra that was not legal about like the way that they got to his server? Maybe that might have come up at trial, but he never had a trial. He was dead.
That's just it. And it's one of those, it's like, we're never going to know now. Because, like, you can't talk to a dead guy, but that was a crazy takedown they had and everything. And one of the things from your book we're not really going to get deep into today because we're coming up on the end here, but another one that was a huge standout in there was the whole case against, like, I forget what the new term is for now, but the term we
child
used to know
sexual
is,
abuse materials,
right.
yeah.
So
videos,
what we know is child porn when they talk about it in the media, but they were able to use, long story short here, they were able to use cryptocurrency tracing techniques to be able to get these guys, including, you open your book with an example of a teacher in Atlanta, Georgia, who was a vice principal who was caught using this method, essentially he had collections of child porn.
Absolutely.
On his stuff.
I mean, he actually was later charged.
Rape too. Yeah.
That vice principal was charged with actual abuse of kids in his school. And this case, which again, this is Tigran Gambarian at the IRS, who on his way home from Bangkok, like calls up Chainalysis to see like, do they have any new leads? Chainalysis tips him off to this site called Welcome to Video, which would turn out to be not only the biggest child sexual abuse video market on the dark web, but also one that actually uses cryptocurrency, which is unusual actually. Usually these sites kind of people trade videos essentially. And that allowed them, IRS and Chainalysis, to trace out the entire network. And I know we're coming up to the end, so I'll just summarize that they arrested 337 uploaders, downloaders, abusers of children around the world, and rescued 23 kids. I don't know the details of those. They wouldn't tell me, like, of course, for like the sake of the victims, like most of those stories. I tell one story in the book, but that's like a that is in some ways like the incredible proof of the power of this technique, that they were able to, with cryptocurrency tracing alone in almost every case, identify all of these pretty abhorrent individuals.
Well, that's great that they were able to do that with that. That's just, I don't.
Well, it's true.
That's one of those I just can't fathom. I don't know.
It is. There's, of course, I didn't want to and could not legally look at the materials, but on this site, and it was taken down. But I talked to all of IRS agents are not equipped either to like look at this stuff, but they had to. Tigran Gambarian and his partner in that case, Chris Jancheski, they were thrown into the deep end. Like, these are financial investigators who have never looked at this stuff before and had no idea what they were getting into and were traumatized. I mean, like,
I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine.
It's definitely like a part of, even as I have covered this stuff for this world of hackers and the dark web for 15 years or whatever, and I've always kind of like averted my gaze from that world, and because it's just so dark. It's like the darker part of the dark web than I have ever wanted to even tell the story of, and I just had to here. But it has a happy ending, and it's like an incredible kind of climax to this series of cases.
Yeah, and I'm glad you told that story too, because it's, luckily most of us can't fathom that world, but it's not two people in it. That's the really scary thing. There are a lot of people around the world who are in that kind of shit, and the internet has provided an unfortunate safe haven for them to be able to engage in this in a way that the world has never seen. And so, any way that can be caught in this way, if it's done through cryptocurrency, sounds great to me.
I mean, it absolutely is. It's like totally unambiguously a righteous takedown, that one. But then I do kind of like try in the book too to even after all of that to ask the question, like, is this actually a good thing for the world? That it turned out that like what was supposed to be almost like an escape valve from financial surveillance turned out to be the opposite. Like, financial surveillance is just so pervasive. It's so hard to use money privately. And Bitcoin was meant to offer that. And instead, it's served as a trap for everybody, whether they are like child abusers or whether they're like dissidents or activists or people
trying that might not be the worst.
Exactly. People who actually might need privacy. There's just always two sides to this. It's like hard to see that other side once you've seen the incredibly like truly evil ways that this technology was people were trying to use it. But then there are like legitimate reasons to try to keep your money private, and it's not an entirely good feeling to come to the conclusion that Bitcoin is not that. It's the opposite of it.
Well, maybe the only appropriate last question is for you, just having done not only all the work on this book, but having lived among this world and reported in it for now over a decade. Where do you see, obviously, like we're talking when there's an enormous bear market and we just had the whole FTX blow up and all that. It's a whole separate conversation. But where do you see cryptocurrency going? Do you think there's something else that'll come up to replace it? Or do you think that the ecosystem we've seen get built will eventually become a monetary system?
Well, I think that I don't know, there are maybe like three different branches of like where things are going. There's the kind of civilized, like cryptocurrency has mostly become very civilized. Like it's become very legitimate, and this notion that it's like a tool for crime.
All money is.
I mean, it's a smaller and smaller percentage of all cryptocurrency is used for crime, but actually a larger and larger absolute amounts of cryptocurrency is involved in crime. It's still growing in that sense. But that's the kind of second fork that I'm talking about, which is that largely that is happening thanks to like Russian cyber criminals, untouchable people in Russia or North Korea who can be traced but can't be stopped, And then there is this third like very interesting thing that's happening, I think worth mentioning, which is something like Zcash. Like the dream of the Cypherpunks, where we started this whole conversation, is still alive. Of like, what if we can still create a technology for truly untraceable payments? And Zcash may be that. And then we've opened a whole new can of worms, which is a digital cash for the internet whose promises of privacy and untraceability hold up. And then where are we? Like, then what about those abhorrent markets for child abuse? Like, what about the drug trade? It's going to be, it'll be good for privacy. It'll be, I don't know, very dangerous in other ways. And that world has never existed. And, we're just like on the edge of a very unknowable future. Well,
there are good and bad people in the world, and there always will be. And some of it's really heavy to think about, because if you could wave a wand and just make everyone good, obviously, if you're a good person, you would. But there are questions certainly to ask as far as like what is the biggest net good? Is the biggest net good not necessarily on the side of the government being able to trace where every single thing goes, especially with a digital footprint in a new world? Could be that it's on the other side of that, and the other side of that holds bad, because then when you give privacy, bad people do bad things. I don't know. That's why I'm not paid to give those answers and everything. But it's certainly, your book comes at a really good time, because as we move into this totally interconnected, globally internet world that we have now officially gone into, but it gets more and more iterated over time. These are questions that we got to ask, and these are things that people got to become aware of, because when things like money and your footprint, your digital footprint become the center of your ability to be a citizen in the world, that's where shit can get real scary. So I like the pathway you're on here, but again, you've kind of been on this since the beginning almost. Like you were at the earliest stages of this, and you're growing with it, and your stories are growing with it. And so, as I've always said, I recommend your books heavily. You have, what is it, 3 now?
Yeah, this is the third.
This is the third one, and this one's called Tracers in the Dark. Once again, you can hit that link in the description to get it off Amazon. Highly recommend. I'm like 2/3 of the way through it. I think it's phenomenal so far. But your last one we talked about in our last podcast, number 99, that's Sandworm. Talked a bunch about that. And what was the name of the first one about Julian Assange and the Cypherpunks again?
Yeah, it was called This Machine Kills Secrets, which was like a reference to WikiLeaks,
Right?
Really, which was sort of like another thing that came out of the Cypherpunks. But then, in the midst of that book, I came across cryptocurrency, and I've wanted to write a book about it ever since. I just didn't ever expect it would be this story.
But it did. And we talked about that one a bunch as well on the last podcast. So again, I'd really recommend that. But listen, thank you so much for coming back down here to do this. Did a great job. This story is awesome. Again, I highly recommend it. And I'm looking forward to seeing where the reporting takes you next.
Well, it's always a great conversation. I really appreciate it, Julian.
Of course. All right. Everybody else, you know what it is. Give it a thought. Get back to me. Peace.